Hi, my name is William.
And I'm Mason.
And we are On Topic,
A podcast where we discuss interesting things with interesting people.
Today we will be talking about infinity and randomness, which, being the math guy, is much more his field than mine. I will offer fun, interesting theological and philosophical insights as we go along. But my hope for this is that you will kind of walk us through the intricacies and implications of infinity and randomness.
Yeah. Where to begin? I have a lot of notes for this podcast. I have quite a lot I wanted to talk about.
I imagined as much.
I think we should just hop straight into it, to be completely honest with you. And I can jump in and interject with some insight as to what the math world says about certain things when applicable. But do you think randomness actually exists?
It depends on what you mean by exist. But
okay. Do you think that the universe actually permits true randomness? Or is everything deterministic?
Like capital R?
Are we making a distinction between lowercase and uppercase R?
Yeah, because if it's capital R, then no.
Interesting. Okay.
But then, if it's lowercase r, then sure. To an extent.
The reason why I was going to ask this is because I had kind of toyed with the idea in a previous podcast, which may very well never see the light of day.
Yeah. The duality thing.
Yes. I was because we're kind of combining randomness and infinity as like two concepts in this one, because they're both in my idea, or they're kind of related in some way.
Yeah, why don't we not jump right into it? Why don't we lay some groundwork real quick? Why don't you walk us through first? So, what is infinity, and how does it work?
That's the problem. That is kind of jumping into the deep end here. So I think I like to distinguish between a practical infinity and a real infinity.
Okay. Because
usually things we consider to be real are things we consider to be observed or at least understood to a certain extent, right?
Okay.
I can judge that this water bottle is real because I can see it, I can feel it, I filled it up earlier, I have memories of this water bottle.
Right.
There's a lot of things that leads me to believe that water bottle is real.
Yeah.
But you can't really do that with infinities, right? If I wanted to say, you can't really observe infinity. You might, because of your theological, sense and whatnot, but from my perspective, the closest thing I have to infinity is maybe the expanse of the universe, but even that isn't infinite, right?
Isn't it?
No, not as it is now, which we can talk about as well, and how time relates to that. But
I'm intrigued.
But if I took a snapshot of the universe right now, it is of a finite size. It is continually growing, but it's of a finite size.
Right. Growing infinitely, but not infinite.
Yeah. So that's what I think, you can kind of understand infinity conceptually to be just without bound. But a practical infinity is more how we would define it in mathematics, which you can then use kind of like a number in order to figure out certain things.
How do you use it in mathematics?
So if you're trying to find a limit to something, I could say, if I wanted to find a limit of something that's asymptotic, I'm not sure how you say that word, but essentially it's approaching a certain number, but it never actually gets there, right? So you could have a slope that's going down and getting closer and closer and closer to the x-axis, but it never quite gets there. If I say the limit as it approaches infinity, I would just say that it is what it's going towards. So an asymptote that approaches zero but never quite gets there, if I wanted to take a limit as it goes to infinity, I would say it just is zero, which then is super useful for integration and stuff like that in math. So that's what I would call practical infinity. Whether or not those two are actually the same, I actually have no idea.
Fair enough.
Because
there are different sizes of infinity.
Yes, I don't know if we should get into that right now, because that is part of one of the questions I had to ask for you.
All right.
So I might come to that later.
Very well. How about randomness?
Now, randomness is different. Randomness.
Yes, it is.
Randomness, we can kind of put a structure to certain things, right? I can say flipping a coin in a perfect, situation, right? Because flipping a coin isn't, you could argue that's not technically random. But
the head is a little bit heavier.
yeah, but just imagine the coin scenario as it, in its best form. You can say this is a random event, but I can then put a quantification towards like, hey, 50% here, 50% there.
Right.
So we can put certain attributes onto something that is at its core random. Right. So it's a little bit different. Randomness is something I'm less familiar with than infinity.
Okay.
But from the previous podcast, one thing that I was toying around with is that the only two things that have any influence on everything in the universe is randomness and infinities, which is, and they're kind of constantly at a tug with each other. And it kind of relates to how, so the general theory of relativity is great at things that are big, and then quantum mechanics are good at something that's small. And I was trying to think about, okay, how can you make like some type of characterization of that? And the closest thing I got was infinities and randomness. So yeah, that's kind of the core of what we're going to be discussing today. Going back to that, you said randomness doesn't exist.
Not in and of itself.
Okay,
maybe,
so what distinguishes
maybe not at
lowercase
all.
and uppercase then?
Well, right, like last time, how we were talking about... well, okay. No, it can't exist. Okay. Capital R, randomness. I would be...
Sorry, I'm trying to open my water bottle
squeak. I would think of as indicating something that is perfectly, absolutely random. It is itself pure chaos. There is no order to it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And then lowercase r, I would use in the same way that we've been using lowercase g, good, to indicate like, it's like relative to other things that exist. It's kind of up there. It's like better than those things. Is it capital G good? Is it actually good? No, but it's better. And so we can use lowercase g good as a sort of as a means for convenient communication.
Mm-hmm.
To say, well, relative to other things, this thing is a good thing, even though it's still bad. And so lowercase r, random, I would say, like, relative to other things, this is somewhat chaotic and disordered, but still it's ordered because it exists.
Gotcha. And intuitively, I would tend to actually agree with that. Although
science affirming theology.
I'm not
as usual
100%.
I think we can just preface the podcast by saying that we have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is going to be like more of an exploratory episode. We're just kind of
take what we say as with a grain of salt, and don't necessarily take these things as our codified opinions on the topics.
Right. We're here to either come to an opinion or just have a good discussion about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So back to that, I think your explanation of that does tend to make sense, especially from my deterministic framework. Because like you could...
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I was actually thinking about it. We'll put an aside here.
I mean, okay, but if you're a determinist, every event is predetermined, but that doesn't make it not random, right? Because the unfolding of the universe would have been, it occurs in a particular order, but is there any sort of teleological structure to the order in which it unfolds, or is it unfolding randomly? Is it unfolding in an order that was randomly set?
That's an interesting question. And I would say I don't know. Because that is actually... Yeah, I'm realizing that is a little bit of a conflict of interest there. Or not a conflict of ideals, maybe.
Right, a little bit of cognitive dissonance.
Possibly.
Yes. Yeah.
Because one part of me wants to say... Well, okay, let me...
That may be loud.
let me just go off on another tangent real quick.
Bet.
There is a field in mathematics called chaos theory. I have recently shown you a very good video.
We can link it.
Yeah, we'll put it somewhere, maybe on screen or something. I don't know.
Like,
We'll figure
in the
it
description,
out.
brother.
In the description of whatever platform.
Have you ever used YouTube?
But yeah, it's essentially, the best way I can explain it is you have a closed system where you set certain preconditions for that system and then you let it do its thing, and those preconditions will drastically change the outcome of that situation. One of the ones that we were recently showing is a double pendulum. So whatever the starting position of a double pendulum is will radically change down the line what its, quote unquote end position is, right? So if you took a snapshot of a time interval at some later time, it's going to depend massively on whatever the preconditions were for that.
Right.
So things can change and change very quickly. That's essentially the heart of it. And I was thinking, can you equate the entire universe to that? The birth of the universe was some precondition that then led to a wildly different outcome. We just happen to be in one of those outcomes.
One of
the possible outcomes. Obviously, I don't think that'll agree with your framework super well.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not amicable to it. God works through means, but I'm not entirely sure I'm tracking, to be honest with you. It's like the implication is that there was something before. There was a precondition that was not like this that led to this. And it's like,
yeah. And so like so I don't exactly know what those preconditions would look like, right? Because I wasn't here at the birth of the universe. But it is kind of an alluring idea to me, at least. I don't know why. I
would almost have more trouble thinking something else. Right? What other option is there besides assuming that there was a precondition that wasn't like this, and then there was this, and this is different from the precondition? That seems like a necessary truth.
I guess it would just be the implication that those preconditions could change. I think that would just be the difference, which I guess it is just kind of an argument for the multiverse, now that I think about it.
This would be that we should do a podcast on the multiverse, because that has super interesting theological implications
that I'm not super aware of. I would have to do some research into that.
Yeah, me too.
In preparation, because I'm not super familiar with it.
But that would be really interesting.
Yeah, so one thing, because we were trying to define randomness before.
Keep dinking the base of my mic stand with my water bottle. Continue.
Yeah. Is there are two different types of randomness that are defined.
Okay.
And you might take issue with the naming conventions here, but we'll see. The first one is ontological randomness.
Terrible. Awful.
But
abysmal name.
Yeah, so essentially ontological randomness, both of these are kind of like, have their roots in quantum mechanics.
I see why you would say that I would have take issue with that name.
So the first one is that there isn't necessarily a distinct deterministic cause for a certain state of something until it is observed. So it isn't actually random, and you can't see that it is random unless you've observed it. This is kind of like in quantum computing, where a qubit it's both a 1 and a 0, but as soon as you observe it, it ends up just being a 1 or a 0.
Okay.
So that's the first one. And then there's epistemic randomness, which is randomness doesn't necessarily exist, but it's more so a lack of knowledge. So like if I'm bouncing a ball, right? Sorry, I really get into Boston-esque accents when I say words like ball. But yeah, so it's more like you're more limited by a lack of knowledge than something that's actually truly random. Does that make sense?
Abandons the hypothetical entirely.
I realize there's no way I can really do that, but
right. So yeah, there's a moral theory that actually I guess it's theological. There's a theological idea that that holds super closely to that. I disagree with this. I don't hold to this idea, but the claim is that evil doesn't actually exist at all. Everything is good. Evil is just sort of an illusory concept that we've created in our limited perception of things that are good.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds like
it kind of sounds
latter
similar,
randomness thing, yeah.
Yeah. I think people that would most likely agree with the second of the latter of the two are probably people that believe in a theory of everything. Right, because they could believe that everything is explainable. It's just it might be so complex that we haven't found out,
right?
How it works yet.
Do you think this?
No.
Why?
I think a theory of everything is impossible.
Why?
Because okay. I believe that things are infinitely complex and therefore you can't quantify them.
This is biblical.
And I think that's kind of just how the universe very well might just operate, is on that precondition, which is where I'm kind of deriving my my reliance on randomness as like a fundamental concept of the universe from.
Where's the link between randomness and infinity there coming in? Because you're saying everything is infinite, and therefore it can't all be understood because there's an infinite amount of it.
Yeah.
But where does that bring randomness in?
I had a connection earlier, and I don't remember exactly what it was. It may have been misinformed. It might just be infinity.
Now we're talking. Progress.
So okay. Yeah. I think that would be reliant on infinity, not randomness. We'll come around and see if another one ends up being derived from randomness instead of infinity, but I believe that would be from infinity because it would just be infinitely complex.
Yeah.
But is it... But you can't equate infinite complexity to randomness, can you?
No. I don't think so. I didn't really think about that before I responded, but no, I don't think so. Because you can have an infinitely ordered system. A system that is infinite, but all of its infinite.
But is it infinitely
ordered.
complex? I don't think it's infinitely complex. I feel like that's finitely complex, but infinite in scale. So like the real numbers or something.
Mandelbrot said. Infinite, ordered.
Okay, and then there's the argument, is the Mandelbrot set actually random? It's infinite, but is it actually random?
I think it's random because it occurs the same way every time you look at it. It is one infinitely complex structure.
But is it infinitely complex? I don't know if it is infinitely complex.
It is. No matter how far in you go on it, there is.
But there's always a structure to, like, you know why a certain part of it is.
Sure. How are you defining infinitely complex?
I almost think of it like a variable. So like if I'm inputting something,
right?
Say I have a one variable input that changes some system. That would be finitely complex because you can kind of determine what the outcome is going to be, but you can change what that number is to an infinite capacity, but you can't but you only have one variable input. But if you have an infinitely multivariate complex system, that I would say is infinitely complex. I think the complexity comes from the different knobs you can turn to a system.
Sure, I mean that.
And the Mandelbrot set is finite in its own preconditions, right?
I believe it's an equation, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're looking for something with an infinite number of variables going in that then get tweaked in an ordered way. So So the infinite comes in the variables, and then the order that would make it not random comes in the operation, and then the output is disregarded here.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you've just described the universe, because there's an infinite amount of stuff. There's an infinitely varied amount of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the stuff would be the variables here, and then the laws of nature, the natural laws, would be the operation, and then the output is
Sure, but if you have infinite variables, is that not just random at that point?
Well, I don't think. I think I think a factor that will make our communication on this a little bit shaky is that when we talk about random, I do tend to look at this teleologically, because I feel like you're looking at it mechanistically, which is commonly a disparity in our trains of thought.
Mm.
But when we say random, for me, it's like without cause or without purpose. Like, it's that way for no reason is the way that I just intrinsically or instinctively sort of conceptualize randomness. And so for me, because like there's an infinite amount of stuff, but all of it was created purposefully, like intentionally, purposefully by an infinite being, creator. And so while it's infinitely varied, it's not random because it was all made with a purpose.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. So so that would make sense why you don't consider randomness to actually exist.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and then there's also the fact that, like, what we get from divine simplicity, like we were talking about in the last podcast, where it's like, so God is being, and I wonder if the time thing throws a wrench in these gears, but I don't think so. Yeah, no, it doesn't. Okay, so God is being, and God is order, right?
Mm-hmm.
God is the root of all being. We get this in Aquinas. We get this in the other guy. Augustine. God is the root. God is the essence of being itself. And probably also in the Church Fathers, but just like directly from Scripture, we get that God is divine order, so to speak. Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Mm-hmm. Like a little jig you did there.
Thank you. So God is being, and God is order. And we know because of divine simplicity that anything that God is what God is.
Sick.
Any term that we use to describe a thing that God is really just a different label for the same singular essence, right? Because God is simple. He's not made of parts. He is not a composition. There's just one essence that is God.
Mm-hmm.
And so any of these things that God is defined as, love, order, being, goodness, beauty, truth, whatever, all of those things are just different names for the same single essence, different labels or iterations of one thing. And this means that, like we talked about last time, we get an identity between order and being. Right? So you can put it into a biconditional and it works because they're different names for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have a cube and you put A and B, and A equals B means that both A and B are referring to the same cube. It has both those names.
I understand how biconditional works.
No, this isn't biconditional. This is identity, right? Two names, same object.
Okay, sure.
This one thing is both A and B. And so we can put it into a biconditional because it's one thing.
Right.
I wonder if I'll be invested enough in this to make a little infographic screen. Probably not. Right, so we can put it into a biconditional. So we can say necessarily 100% of the time, if order then being, and because it's a biconditional, if being then order.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this means is that in order for something to exist, in order for something to have being, it must necessarily be ordered. It has to have order in order to have being. And randomness, chaos, is the absence of order. And so if you have absolute randomness, if you have 100% absence of order, then you also have 100% absence of being, because they're because they're the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay, so that does answer my next question on there.
Let's go.
Which, I mean, you can dive into more if you want, but it kind of is already answered with that, which is there room for chance under the guidance of God?
What do you mean by chance?
Chance basically just meaning randomness, right? Like, is flipping a coin, like, is that, does God allow for that system to be truly random?
I don't feel.
Or would you just?
I don't feel confident enough.
Or not neglect, but just reject the fact that even is random.
I don't feel confident enough in my theological awareness to answer this authoritatively.
Okay.
My suspicion would be that no, it's not truly random. But I can't affirm that claim.
That makes sense. From everything that we've come up to this point with, that does make sense.
I feel like a more compelling argument would be that our actions are random. What? Our actions are random?
Randomless.
I think the most compelling argument you could make for randomness with God is human choice, because we do have free will.
Sure.
I mean, under religious axioms, we do have free will. And so, in that sense, you could you could make the argument that our own decisions are random to an extent, because they're the one thing that's not dictated by absolute order. But then I don't think even that would hold, because A, we're made in the image of God, and so we're made as ordered beings, and B, per my conception of randomness, and I don't know if I can hold this conception up authoritatively either, but if we're assuming that randomness is without reason, then any choice being made by a person is necessarily not random, because it was made for a reason.
Right. Yeah.
You can't make a decision without a reason for making that decision, and that means that the decision is necessarily not random, because it has a purpose.
Sure. Yeah. I can understand that.
Yeah. And so the reason that I asked what you mean by chance is because there is a sense in which, and I don't know, this is a very much we are walking on eggshells with this topic in theology.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm hesitant to really give any answers to this sort of thing. I haven't studied this particular area enough, but there is a sense in which, right, giving people free will, letting us make our own choices, was sort of a chance that was taken, right? Because if we can decide to do whatever we want to decide to do, then there is a chance that we would decide to do not what God wants us to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who make the argument that was done intentionally as a means of justifying the damnation of the group that is to be damned. I do not like this idea. I do not hold to this idea, but it is a valid theological stance that you can take.
Mm-hmm. I think we touched on it before, but I just wanted to get your, thoughts on that. So like a lot of things seem intuitively random in the universe. Would you agree with that?
What do you mean? Give me an example.
So like, I think I don't know if we discussed this on the last podcast or the podcast before, but I brought up Brownian motion.
And I will say what I said last time, which is that I thought you said brownie in motion.
Yeah. But like essentially Brownian motion is, I'll just explain it briefly again. Brownian motion is essentially just random motion. That's kind of like the stand-in word for that idea. But it was done via observing pollen under a microscope in a petri dish. And they realized that the motion of the pollen was seemingly random. Right? So I wanted to get your idea on that. I feel like this shows up everywhere as well, right? Like, for example, in mathematics, the biggest culprit of randomness is primes. Prime numbers, there is no general form of a prime number. We can exclude things from being prime numbers, but we can't, like you wouldn't be able to take a function, give it an input, and have it always print out a prime number. We haven't been able to do that yet. Which is kind of like the spawn of a lot of different random things. It's almost deterministically random. It's using like cryptography and stuff, right? Because if you want to make it seem random, right, but then you could input the same thing and get the same seemingly random result out every time. That ends up being super useful in cryptography.
Interesting.
And so primes are used all over the place. But if you came up with a general form for a prime, it would like break all of that. Anyway, prime numbers are another example of something that is seemingly random in nature. And these things kind of pop up all over the place. Does that mean that the universe then has a capacity to then represent randomness? Or is that just something that isn't truly random? It's just so complicated that we think it is.
That would be my suspicion. The first question to ask is really, sorry, I said the words in the wrong order. The first question to ask is this really random? Mm-hmm. And so my inclination would be to kind of take the first thing you were saying and just tweak it a little bit to say like, well, yes, the world has a capacity to represent randomness, but not to be random. This is where we get the lowercase r. I think those things are probably more random than other things, but I don't think they're capital R random.
Okay.
Would be my suspicion.
Okay, I think a nice term here is actually, we should talk about pseudo-randomness, which is, sure, because that might help, we can just throw this in whenever, but for example, in computer science, there's a thing called a hash function, which all it asks you to do is give it some input, and you need to have it be consistent. So if you give it the same input, it'll always give the same result, but that result is wildly different depending on the input, which is basically kind of like chaos theory, but you come up with like a model to do that, and that's what we would call pseudo-randomness. So I can input the word cat and get a string of like a bunch of random numbers or seemingly random numbers. And if I input cat again, it'll give me the same thing again. So it's always going to print the same thing. But if I give it bat, which is very similar to it, I just changed one character, it'll give me something wildly different, even though I just changed one character.
Okay, I'm with it.
So that's the whole point of a hashing function. It's also useful in cryptography.
Seems like it would be.
That is a perfect example of something that is pseudo-random, right? It's where you get things like RNGs, random number generators. That's how they work, in essence. A lot of things, if you wanted it to be more convincingly random, a lot of people will have it depend on the time of day.
Interesting.
In order to give a certain result, like or the date, time, month, year, everything like that. You put them all together just to get something that you think is like truly random. I think they do it down to the nanosecond actually.
Sheesh.
And it gives you like the most accurate representation of random, but it's not quite random because it's still deterministic.
Yeah.
So I think I just wanted to clarify that's probably a good stand-in term to use during this.
Fair enough. And I think that would be a good example of the way that all randomness occurs in the universe.
So you think that all observed seemingly random events are to some extent pseudo-random, or to a fully just pseudo-random?
Yeah, and not even that, but I think that there is a person on the other person, that there is a being on the other side that does understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like we've got over here the person who wrote the hash function, who knows all the inputs and what they'll output, and then we are the hackers on the other side trying to peer into the system and just seeing the outputs of the hash function and looking at it and being like,
Gotcha.
what in the...
We're the people trying to break SHA-1, which only computer science people will know what I just said. But yeah, actually, this is good. I'll bring it up just because I think it'll be kind of interesting to your example there. But yeah, a team at Google, a research team, actually did break one of the earliest hash functions by reverse engineering it.
Wow.
Called SHA-1. We're on SHA-256 now, I think. It's like the gold standard. It is not going to be... It's just not going to be broken. I think it was SHA-1. Maybe even SHA-2.
What is a SHA?
I forget what it stands for. I know the H is probably hash or hashing, but I don't exactly remember what it is. I think it was developed by the U.S. government, but
SHA, dude.
But yeah, SHA-1 was actually officially broken. They understand exactly what happens with that hash function now. So yeah, we're like the Google team trying to break.
Who wrote the SHAs?
The U.S. government.
Oh yeah, you said that.
Yeah. No one uses SHA-1 anymore.
Well,
yeah,
naturally.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, I think that's actually a kind of a cool way of looking at it. But what is the extent of that system then, right? Because if we can say, okay, let's develop a hashing function, and then we are essentially playing God in this example, right? We are the creators of that. What's the distinction then between our universe as one big function and a hashing function? Like, what would you say is that? Well, why am I not equivalent to God, and what makes the two systems super different? Is it infinitely multivariate?
Well, God being a creator isn't the only thing that makes God God. That's not a single box to check.
Right? Yeah. I think it's I think it's kind of an interesting idea.
Some easy things that would make you not God. You're not perfectly good. You're not perfectly truthful. You're not perfectly beautiful. Sorry. You're not perfectly loving. You're not infinite. You're not eternal. You're not all-knowing.
It's a roast session.
Yeah, I mean, we're made in God's image, right? So we're made with the spirit of creation. We are here. The first thing that we were here to do is, right? Even before we get Eve, we get God brought all the beasts of the field and whatever to Adam and to see what he would call them. We've been working since day one, and our work was a creative work, right? It was taxonomy. We were naming classes, naming categories of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get woman, and once we're in a better state, because we've got woman based, then the command that we're given is be fruitful and multiply, go forth and subdue the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of our whole thing is to be agents of creation, and that is in the image of God. You're not wrong to see the connection there, but that doesn't make us God for all the other reasons we...
Right. But okay, but if then the universe is the universe God's only creation? That's my first question.
Yeah. Well, okay. Are you using universe in like a technical sense, or universe to refer to everything? Because
well, then obviously he is the universal creator. Correct? Like just he is the creator of.
Like,
everything.
are we assuming that the universe is all that exists?
Yes.
Then yes.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, I don't think that question works, because the question is everything that exists the only thing that God made?
Which means that there isn't everything
yes.
there isn't anything outside those bounds.
Right, yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so from mechanistic perspective then, would you accept that the physical universe that we know via science and whatnot is that actually an encapsulation of everything?
I don't know if it is or isn't, but it certainly well could be, especially given that it's infinitely expanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it is kind of, well, okay, so what distinguishes that system from a hashing function then?
The universe?
Yes.
Well, so
besides just being, more complex or whatever, besides just having more variable inputs or whatever.
Well, it's got life in it, I think is probably the biggest thing. I think part of God's creation, I think probably the biggest part of God's creation that separates it from anything we could create is consciousness, the breath of life, spirit, soul, whatever you want to say. But there are active, agential, creative beings made in God's image that can act independently, that have free will, like true free will in creation. And in anything we make, I don't think we have the capacity to imbue that into something else. I don't think we can create a true AI, for example. I think it'll always necessarily sort of be bound by the design of bound by the way that we set it up. And we can try to, like you were talking about with the hash functions or whatever, we can make it to appear free, we can make it to appear random, we can really make a very convincing impression of free will or of consciousness, right. But I don't think we can actually get there. And I do have an interesting sort of idea with this general topic, which is that right, so with the Platonic conception of the transcendentals, with our idea that there's like at the very top in the world of the forms, there's this perfect, absolute goodness, beauty, truth, whatever. There's the form of a horse, and it's just like exactly the perfect essence of what a horse is supposed to be. Sure. And then in the real world, Platonists would find that insulting. In the physical world, then in biblical terms, everything that's like good in the physical world is a reflection of the transcendental, the ultimate good that is God, right? Any worldly love is a reflection of the perfect love of Christ.
Sure.
For example.
Wow. Sure. I tried to speak and there was just no voice.
So it goes down a resolution, right? We have like 1080p at the top with God, and then we go to the physical world, and then it goes down to 720p. We lose some resolution on the good. It's a reflection. It's like a mirror that's a little bit cloudy, and so every time we reflect it, it gets a little bit less clear.
Right, and then, like a slightly tinted window. But you put like a ton of them, and then it just eventually turns into nothing.
Right. So the implication then is that if we create something, then it can only be a pale reflection of our pale reflection of the ultimate good, right? So we have 1080p, then we go to the material world, the created things, the things that are made in God's image.
Right.
And then we get this reflection, we get 720, then we create things. We try to make consciousness. We try to make whatever. We try to make something else. That we try to make goodness or beauty or truth. I guess does this only work with created beings, maybe? I don't know. No, it doesn't.
I
So
don't
if
think
we
it
try to
would,
make
yeah.
like terraforming is a perfect example of this.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to mimic God's creation, which is in itself sort of a mimicry of the beauty of God, right?
Sure.
Perfect beauty, natural beauty, created beauty, humanly created beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so then if we make AI, then that's like a third order representation of absolute perfect will or whatever, absolute consciousness.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then you get AI trying to build robots, and then we'll have fourth order consciousness.
So it's like, it is kind of like a. Sorry, my throat just made a weird noise.
You seem to be going through
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. But it's almost like it's okay. So, something that's kind of cool with that then is that, you know how we were talking a while ago. I don't know if it was on air, but we were talking a while ago about like an infinite regress of simulations. God,
Remind me?
so essentially, like you could be in a universe that's simulating a universe that's simulating a universe, and it can just keep on going on infinitely.
Okay, sure.
Which I don't think is possible, just for reference. But like you could make an argument that God is first off one end of an infinite list. So he is the start of
Right.
a singly infinite list.
Sure.
But each step of that list gets more and more opaque.
Yes.
Is there a limit to that then? Is there a limit to, like, how low can the resolution go?
We're getting back to your mathematics thing, right? Because the limit would be 0, but I think we're infinitely approaching, but we'll never hit, maybe?
I see what you're saying. So a theoretical limit would be 0.
I don't know the fancy math terms.
Okay.
But, like, I think you could hypothetically get infinitely low resolution before hitting no resolution at all.
Is that pure evil?
Well, yeah, I mean, pure evil is the same thing as non-existence, so.
But nothing can't exist.
Nothing can't exist?
Can't? Okay.
Nothing could exist. Well, that's actually a fun philosophically debated thing.
I was going to say, because that can't. The worst thing would be not existing, but not existing would mean. Hold on, there's something there. Isn't non-existence not possible then?
Like nothing existing whatsoever?
No. Anything not existing.
It's not possible for anything to not exist?
That's what my question for you.
It's possible for something to not exist.
Okay. Is it possible for something to be absolutely evil?
Not while existing.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Like, this is another one of those capital lowercase situations.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can be very, very evil. But if there's no good in you, then you don't exist because it's good to exist.
Gotcha. So if you're following the resolution chain, isn't following that chain just getting closer and closer to evil?
Yes. This is why I don't think we should be trying to make it. This is one of the many reasons I don't think we should be toying with AI.
I see. But it's still good because evil itself, you're saying, does not exist.
Absolute evil would be absolute
what
non-existence.
What about lowercase e evil? Lowercase b bad.
Okay.
Does that exist, or is that just the absence of good, right?
Absence of good.
Absence of good. Okay.
An interesting question with that I'm not sure I have the answer to is if it's like scalar. Like there's the binary, you either are or you are not. You exist and you can be better or worse than some things, but then at the absolute worst, you don't exist. But is it that as you get more evil, your existence also becomes less potent. My suspicion is to say perhaps, but I'm not prepared to qualify that claim.
Possibly. It depends. I guess it depends on what you mean by existence then, which we discussed last time for way too long and didn't really get anywhere.
We discussed if we could know that we exist.
We also were struggling to define existence for a while, to be fair.
Surely we can be on the same page of existence.
I will play along.
What do you mean? What do you think existence is?
I don't want to answer that. But I think, okay, so, right, but like you could say, okay, so on a level of how much I exist versus how much Genghis Khan existed, did he exist more than I did? Because we still talk about him. He's still talking about it. He's a historical figure or whatever. And obviously, I don't know, maybe I'll become a historical figure or something, but as it stands right now, does Genghis Khan, or if I died today,
right?
Did Genghis Khan exist more than I did?
Did he exist more than... That's a very... I love the idea of this being turned into an insult. You don't exist as much as me, bucko.
Right, because you're saying existence is good. So if we're equating like me existing as like a lower... Well...
Right, I mean, so I know very little about Genghis Khan.
Or is existence just a light switch situation?
Crazy Mongolian
right, and
warlord guy, right?
I'll get to how exactly that'll function now, but like, is existence just an on-off switch? Or can it have a capacity for lowercase or lowercase bad or good?
I think I think existence has to be...
Absolute?
No, granular. Not granular. Spectral.
Okay.
Because like if you're in a coma, you kind of exist a little bit less than someone who's not in a coma. You know what I mean?
Sure, that's what I'm saying. Okay, so if I died today, did Genghis Khan exist more than I did?
He existed longer than you did. But my suspicion would be perhaps less potently. Nietzsche would absolutely slap me in the face for this suspicion, but he was also fundamentally anti-Christian, so
right.
But like, given the little that I know about him, my suspicion is that he made an idol out of power.
I mean,
and sort of like in a very carnal sense, I think the pleasures of the flesh and the pleasures of triumphing over other flesh would have been kind of his core, the locus of his focus.
The reason why I ask that is, well, first off, I just wanted to bring up,
and I think that degrades the scope of your existence, right? The potency of your existence, right? Because if you're living to an end that is carnal, then you're really not living very much. You're bound to that which is born of flesh is flesh.
So would you say that existence then is just, because you're saying it's spectral, and if it is spectral, then does that mean however lowercase g good you are, the more you exist? Because I was gonna bring that up.
Maybe because
in how like Genghis Khan, a lot of people view as, like you said, being like generally a pretty bad person.
And again, I know almost nothing about him, but
and I know a lot of people. One common phrase that gets thrown around is that you kind of die twice. Once when you physically die, and once in the last instance of your name being spoken, or something like that.
Interesting.
So I think, under your framework, I think you kind of have to accept that existence, if it is spectral, is just kind of wherever your capital G good meter is. Lowercase, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because like, here's how I'm looking at it. And this is I've never thought about this before. This is a very interesting idea. Well, I've never thought about it at this depth. But it's like, so if we accept that someone who's in a coma exists less than someone who's not in a coma, then what we're implying is that your existence is relative to the scale of to the magnitude of your consciousness. Right? Because if you're in a coma, then you're at a higher grade of consciousness than someone who's not in a coma.
Sure.
You're still conscious, you still have a functioning consciousness in there, but it's not doing as much and it's not aware of as much.
Sure.
So then the implication is, given the correlation between goodness and being, that and this kind of tracks, right? Because the language that's used all the time biblically is that this is not at all where I thought this podcast would go.
I know, we love staying on topic on this.
The language that's used biblically is a language of a sort of bondage or a sort of trance, right? We're held captive. We are bondservants to our sin. We're confined by it. We're trapped in the clutches of our temptations and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, because you can't be tempted beyond what you will bear. There will always be a way out through God. But if you turn away from God, then you're sort of trapped in your sinfulness. So if you're someone like Genghis Khan, someone like our poorly founded reconstruction of Genghis Khan for the sake of this conversation,
mm-hmm.
then you've made an idol out of the pleasures of the flesh. You've made an idol out of sin, and you're living to serve that, which means that you are bound by, you're entranced by your sin, right? And this means because you're living completely carnally, and your consciousness is bound within the domain of this particular thing, of this desire, then the implication is that you're operating at a lower order sort of consciousness than someone who is freed from sin, which would be the same thing as a higher uppercase good meter. It's a higher lowercase good meter.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really interesting idea. The more you sin, the less conscious you are. I think
and
that
the less
holds.
you exist.
Yes, because the potency of your consciousness is how much you exist per our metric, given the coma thing, which I think tracks. I think most people would be amicable to that. Not that what most people think is an accurate reflection of what is, but
right, yeah.
But I think this probably is, and also I think most people would be amicable to it.
Right.
We would probably lose some people at the sin makes you exist less thing.
Possibly, yeah, but it's an interesting
But
idea.
I think it tracks. That's very interesting. I'm glad we're recording this.
You can listen back to this
yeah,
and be like, yeah,
I will absolutely be exploring this idea.
Yeah, we kind of, we would you believe it? We went a little bit off topic, but I think it was pretty constructive, all things considered.
Yeah, I don't mind. That's what this is for.
Mm-hmm.
The name wasn't. Should we tell them that the name is?
No.
Okay.
No, just let it be.
All right.
One of the things I did want to bring up, going back to randomness, because I think
topic.
Yeah, we gotta go back on topic, man. But I think one of the things that does just like intuitively I'm struggling to get past it is that just so many things pop up in the universe that seem so just random. Like just observationally, it seems so intuitively just like, yes, this is random, right? Like prime numbers. I actually did I looked into a lot of the most common unsolved problems in math, and a shocking number of them either relate to randomness and especially infinities. Infinities is actually, funny enough, I think all 7 of the Millennium Prize problems.
What is a Millennium Prize problem?
A Millennium Prize problem, I forget who actually composed the list, but I think it was composed at the... Oh man, I don't remember. Anyway, it's a list of 7 problems that if you solve them, you win $1 million.
Oh, bet. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. And of those 7, literally all 7 of them had some correlation to the idea of infinity and playing with the idea of infinity.
Is this still standing? Will they pay us?
Yeah, well, there's 6 out of the 7 are still standing. The Poincaré conjecture was solved, but yeah.
I meant the organization that pays.
Oh yeah, no, you still. I mean, that was the other one was solved in I want to say 2000, so only 25 years ago, and I believe he won $1 million. So
solid. Let's do it.
What do you want to start
Mr. Math
on?
Minor.
Which problem do you want to start on?
Lay them on me.
Oh man, I'm not going to remember all of them. The most famous unsolved math problem of all time is the Riemann hypothesis. It's not even close either.
Okay, let's do that one.
You want? Okay, you're starting big. But yeah, I also looked into other unsolved problems, and looked at how like just got an idea for the proportion of them included randomization as a concept, and it was a good amount. Of the 10 I looked into, 4 of them had it, which is the Riemann hypothesis as well. So that deals with both infinities and randomness, because it deals with prime numbers.
Mm.
And if you accept that prime numbers are random, or at least pseudo-random,
okay,
then yeah, it deals with both. Goldbach's conjecture is very cool.
What is it?
For every even number greater than 2. This is the conjecture. This is what we believe to be true. We can't prove it, or we haven't proved it.
Proven.
For every even number greater than 2, it can be composed of a sum of 2 primes. So, like, pick a random even number, hopefully a little bit like lower on there.
4.
4. Okay. Well, 4 can be composed of 2 and 2. Those are 2 prime numbers, 2 and 2.
Right.
Add them together, you get 4. Pick another one that's a little bit greater than 4.
6.
6. Okay. 3 and 3. You get the idea. We assume for all even numbers that's true.
Can be composed of 2
prime numbers added together, summed. And we kind of understand that to be true. Like, just because observationally it kind of makes sense.
Right.
It's been tracking for, it tracks for an absurd amount of numbers.
Is this
that
like pi, where we have like a computer that's off somewhere doing this all the time?
Yeah, they actually. Yeah, I think they. I don't know if it's the same as. They have a system where you can actually. I think it's for calculating Mersenne primes, which are of the form 2n minus 1. And yeah, I think you can actually essentially just like download a program onto your computer that connects to the main database for it and have it actually just be constantly helping with compute power to calculating the next Mersenne prime.
Isn't this what like malware does?
Basically, but
for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so like if you just wanted to have fun, you could just download that and just let it do its thing, and you could be the person responsible for finding the next Mersenne prime. Anyway, I wonder if there's one of those for the Goldbach conjecture, but I don't think so. Anyway, so they actually proved it for, I want to say they proved it for all odd numbers. That has been proved, I believe. But for all evens, we haven't done it yet. Oh no, it's for all odd numbers, you can compose it one of 3 primes summed, I want to say.
Gotcha.
And for evens, it's 2. But we haven't proved that that's the case. I don't think. Anyway, that's a crazy aside, but I find that problem to be very cool. But yeah, both of those rely on prime numbers, which are the closest thing we have in math to randomness.
Right.
But I think a more interesting idea, we can segue into infinities now, is that literally every single problem I looked into related to infinity that was unsolved.
Sure, I mean, this makes sense.
Every single one. Which is, I don't know how you feel about that from like, because a lot of people, well, I think fundamentally you accept that God is infinite, correct? Yeah.
You have to. It says it.
So I don't know how you feel about the fact that every single unsolved problem is related to infinity in some regard.
Makes absolute sense.
Okay, that's what I kind of figured. But
can you guess why?
Well, because you were trying to quantify God, which you can't do.
Well, there's that, but there's a reason that we can't do it.
Okay, hit me.
We're finite. We are finite creatures. We have finite minds.
Mhm.
And so we can't, this is in theology, we call it the creator-creature distinction.
Mhm.
We can't, we are not capable of fully conceiving of anything divine, because anything divine is infinite, and we're not.
But, okay.
We are finite, and therefore we cannot comprehend the infinite, and so we cannot fully comprehend God. And also, of course, anything that has to do with infinity, we can't figure out because we're finite.
Well, but we have used infinity to figure things out.
We've used infinity to figure things out, but that's not the same as figuring out infinity, per se. It's unsurprising to me that the questions that have to do with infinity are things that we can't answer, because we can, it also makes sense that we could answer some things about infinity, right? Because necessarily we're putting limits on it if it's things.
I will say there have been things that people have assumed. There's a lot of things you assume to be true, but you can't prove.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much everything.
Sure. Yeah, actually 100%. But a lot of the time there have been situations where people are like, well, I don't actually know if we can solve this. Like, it's another one of the situations where they have a problem that they don't actually think is solvable, right? Or a lot of some population of people might be like, yeah, I don't actually think there is a solution to this.
Mm-hmm.
But then they do enough research into it and eventually end up proving it.
Right.
So what distinguishes the problems that we assume now are like, well, yeah, of course it's unsolvable because it's infinity, but then what's the distinguisher there, right? Because, for example, the Fermat's last theorem was unsolved for hundreds of years. But we kind of, we're hoping there was an answer, but we didn't know for sure if there was a way to actually concretely prove that it was true until, I think, 98, mid-90s, something like that, 92 maybe. Andrew Wiles, I believe, proved it to be true by sitting in his attic for a year, I think, because he didn't want people to know that he was onto something. But that was one of those problems where people were they had an idea okay, maybe this just isn't solvable. It's been we haven't solved it for 400 years. I feel like it might just be an unsolvable problem. What distinguishes a problem like that from a one that you were saying, of course we can't. We can't solve it because it's.
I'm not necessarily saying that they are unsolvable. It makes if there were something that were unsolvable, it makes absolute sense that it would be something to do with infinity, something to do particularly with the nature of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
If there are problems that are unsolvable, I don't know, and I don't know that I can speak to that. And I don't mean to in this case either. Because here's the thing. We are finite, and thus we ourselves can't conceive of all of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, there are a bunch of us, and we span over a very long period of time. This is why technology gets more advanced, right? Because we stand on the shoulders of giants. This is even per biblical canon. This is why we have different languages, right? Everybody was together hanging out.
All of everybody was hanging out.
And united under one tongue and one rule. And because we were all there together, we got our, big human balls running, and we were like, well, okay, together, all of us, we can just build our own tower up to heaven, and we don't need to do God's stuff or follow God's things. We can just get it on our own through our own achievement, because there are so many of us and we all speak the same language and are united under one rule. And so God was like, nope, different languages, different rule, and divided the people into various I don't know if races is part of this, but various kingdoms, various locations, various tongues.
That's interesting. I didn't know that was part of the...
Yep, Tower of Babel.
That raises some very weird implications, but I don't have to get into it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still figuring out some of that stuff myself.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway. Right, so the closest... So there's... obviously, there's an infinite amount of infinity. And so...
Sure.
I don't think we can ever conceive of all of it, just because no matter how much we conceive of it, there will always be more of it, because there's a finite number of us. We're infinite, like you were saying with the universe. We're infinitely growing, although not anymore, I guess, but we'll fix that. We're infinitely growing, but at any given moment, there is a finite amount of us, and there's an infinite amount of infinity.
Sure.
So yeah, I think over time, I guess the implication there would be that there is also an infinite number of unsolvable problems. Mm-hmm. And my suspicion would be that we will continually solve problems that we once thought were unsolvable, because as we extend forward into infinity, there will be more of us and we will have figured out more things to build on. And so we sort of are stringing together over time bits and pieces of an infinite consciousness, but we don't have one ourselves. And so as time goes on, we'll solve more and more of the infinite problems, and more, or the infinite problems will solve more and more of the unsolvable problems related to infinity, and also we'll find new ones that we think are unsolvable.
So, okay, so that kind of leads me on to whether or not math, because so math and logic are very, very closely tied. Yeah. Logic is essentially a binary system.
Math is just logic with numbers.
Exactly. And numbers you can kind of, an interesting thing is whether or not binary math is basically just logic.
Yeah, fair enough. Boolean,
yeah. So we essentially can expand on that to then get to a decimal system of math. That then we can derive meaning from and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you think math is pure then?
Do I think math is pure?
Because is it a perfect, derivation of logic? Because if logic is God, and we know logic to a certain extent, right? We use logic for a lot of stuff, right. And because math is derivative of logic, is math then a pure from a theological perspective?
My suspicion is that the mathematics of that there is a Platonic sort of mathematics that is perfect, but that's not what we understand or use. My suspicion is that the mathematics of the world is necessarily flawed and incomplete because it's part of the world, right? After the fall, it's not only people that are tainted in sin. All of creation is tainted in sin. The ground is rife with thistles, and labor will be difficult now instead of easy, right? Now we get entropy, for example, in physics and whatever. The very root systems by which things function in the world have been tainted by the sin of the fall. And so no, the mathematics that we understand, I think, has been tainted and is not perfect. But in heaven, you'll get to see perfect math if you come to faith.
My other question then would be, is our understanding of logic then flawed?
Probably in some way, yeah.
Okay.
At least incomplete.
Gotcha. And I think Gödel would agree, so that holds.
My boy.
And I think I also would tend to agree with that.
Let's go. We've got a whole trio here.
Yeah, we gotta get Gödel on the pod.
He's dead, yes.
Yes, I believe so.
Unfortunate.
That was the joke.
I know, but I just wanted to make sure. We can get a Ouija board, but you have to use it because I can't do that because I'm Christian.
I see. So I'm your vessel for sinful practice.
You bring all the demons and I'll sit here and watch.
Okay. Interesting. Where was I going with that?
My vessel for sinful practice.
Yeah, where does that... Okay, so I have to remember where I was going with that. Yes, with the unsolvables. Okay, yeah, so do you think it is actually possible then for a human to come across an unsolvable?
Something that's truly unsolvable?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it says, seek and ye shall find. So...
Okay.
Like
but you said unsolvables, in theory, are like possible. Structurally, they're possible in the universe.
Do you count being told by God as solving?
I wouldn't,
Like
because
if I have a problem and
we're
then
looking
I'm
at
like, God, help me figure out this problem, and then you figure out the problem by divine revelation.
I don't think that
Does
problem
that count?
was you could argue that it wasn't actually unsolvable.
Well, I mean...
But the reason I'm asking is because in the realm, like mathematics is axiomatic for the most part. It like you kind of understand, like you're given the groundwork and then you work from there. It's like a closed system. Does that allow for unsolvables, or does that mean that everything that's generated under that system, or every question you ask about that system, would then be solvable?
I think everything has an answer.
Unsolvable to a human capacity.
I mean, maybe, but unsolvable and incomprehensible aren't necessarily the same thing. Because I think that something could be unsolvable for a person on his own. Like it's impossible for a person to write a text that is completely free of mistakes. But
sure,
by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, we have the Bible, which is infallible. And so I think that something that would be impossible per human conception, an unsolvable problem, could be solved through divine inspiration. So, like, yes and no, it's unsolvable in that we can't solve it on our own, but, like, pray about it, dude. You know?
Okay, sure.
But yeah, I think hypothetically a problem that humans can't solve on their own is possible.
Gotcha.
I don't know if it's guaranteed, but totally possible.
Okay. I'll accept that. Another thing you brought up earlier, which I think we should finally circle around to, is Cantor's... Why did I say his name so weird? Cantor's hierarchy of infinities.
Okay. The sizes thing?
Yes, which, just to give a brief explanation... So
I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah, as like a brief backstory on that, as a brief aside, I should say, as to the hierarchy of infinities, the primary way they found out about that was through the realm of mathematics, although it was kind of bridging the gap between math and just pure philosophy back then with the idea of sets and stuff.
I mean, math really is just a branch of philosophy.
Yeah, but everything is for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in essence, Cantor proved that, say you had a collection of all integers, which is basically negative and positive whole numbers, including zero. So like -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. No fractions of numbers. He proved that infinity, right, so the size of a set of all of those numbers is smaller than the infinity of real numbers, which is that, but it includes decimals and infinite decimals. So like pi and e and all these, irrational numbers were also included in that. And he did that via what he called the diagonalization proof, which you can look up if you want to.
I remember this.
I can't really explain that without a pen and paper.
I remember this, and I remember having issues with it.
Yes, but it's generally widely accepted to be true.
Well, I don't like it.
I'm well aware you don't like it, but...
I don't remember why.
Roll with it for now,
yeah.
okay?
We should go through this again.
It's accepted by the majority of philosophers as well. It's a pretty well understood idea. But yeah, essentially he proved that the size of the set of integers or natural numbers, however you want to do it, they're both the same size, was larger than the size of the set of all real numbers. And that implied that infinities could be larger and smaller than each other.
Which tracks.
Which has generally been, understood and held up, and people accept that to be true. But also they have a whole scheme, like a whole naming convention now. I forget what it is. It's like the Hebrew character that kind of looks like a squiggly N. I don't remember exactly what the character's called, but they have hierarchies that are defined under that. So you could have, what if that character is sub-0, which I think sub-1 is actually where it starts, which is the representation of the size of the infinity of all natural numbers. And then the step above that is the real numbers. And then, but you can keep making those steps up and up and up.
Interesting. Infinitely.
Yes, infinitely. In theory, obviously we can't. I don't actually know if we have a general form for that. But
right.
I was curious how you think what sort of implications that has from a theological perspective. Because I know you said before that God, you kind of separated. You were like, God is infinite, but he isn't infinity. I think is how I remember you explaining it last time. I don't know if that's changed.
Yeah, no, this is right. So I'm not sure these ideas will play nicely with each other. Not in the sense that they contradict each other, but just in the sense that I'm not sure they'll really tie together, because the necessary assumption that I've come to on this topic with theological stuff is that time doesn't exist in and of itself. There's no such thing as time except that matter exists and exists within that framework. It exists in that way. And so we conceptualize time as a way to gauge the existence of matter. But time doesn't exist in and of itself. And so what that means is that qualities that have to do with time, being eternal, being infinite, this sort of thing, doesn't. I guess maybe infinite isn't a time thing, but a matter thing. But even so, it would. Woo.
I was going to say,
that's funky.
I think that could exist very easily without the framework of time.
The eternal stuff is necessarily time bound, because time doesn't exist in and of itself. Then eternal isn't a quality in and of it. That eternal isn't a quality of God. It's not a thing that God is. It's just the way in which God is the things that he is. And the same thing holds, I think, necessarily for infinity, but not on the basis of time, which is very interesting. It would have to be on the basis of matter, because infinity is a physical concept rather than a chronological concept, I feel like.
I mean, infinity can apply to both, but
well, sure. I mean, if we're assuming that time,
sure, yeah.
If we're assuming that time is lower order than matter, then
sure. Are you saying time is derivative of properties of matter?
First order, God. Second order, matter. Third order, time. Time is time doesn't really exist. It's just implicit from matter.
Okay. I'm following along. I don't necessarily agree, but I will follow along.
Sure. Yeah, and we know that God operates outside of time. And I guess, he's not a physical being in the way that we think of physical. That he can't be made of matter because he made matter.
Mm-hmm. Is he made of anything, or is that an invalid question to even ask?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you for that one. But
there's a lot of people they just throw metaphysical on there and call it a day.
Yeah, I'm sure that he exists in some sort of substantial form, but I don't know what on earth that would look like.
Gotcha. But okay, so
like I don't know if he exists physically in the physical plane.
Would he
Certainly,
exist in every plane?
I guess as sort of the groundwork of it, yeah. He's the
Okay.
foundation of all being.
Gotcha.
I mean, he is infinite, and so we can't conceptual like this is we're trying to
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
But
So
it is interesting to me.
my question was then, like, if you have these abstract ways of representing infinity, like the hierarchy, Cantor's hierarchy of infinities. Why did I say infinities like that? Anyway.
Getting messed up with it. Cantor's throwing everything
Yeah,
out.
I don't know why. The word cantor just messes with me. But anyway, if you have this hierarchy, does that... What does that mean? Because you can't equate that infinity to being a property of God, then. Because that means that there's a higher level to it, and then a higher level to it, and then a higher level to it, and you keep climbing up the ladder.
Right, and I think that is resolved by what you were introducing my thoughts on the question as, because God isn't, like, infinite isn't a quality of God, it's a way in which God is his qualities. He isn't infinity, he exists infinitely, he is infinitely good, he is infinitely beautiful. All of the qualities that he has, which really is just one quality. He is infinitely, but infinity itself isn't a quality. Now, how we justify that claim, given that infinity isn't based on time, I'm not entirely sure. We have a start because infinity refers... Well, I don't know. I'll have to meditate on that.
From that, I was gonna ask if you're saying that it's almost like so if you're talking about like a causal chain, then is the concept of infinity a necessary requirement for God?
Yeah. I want to say yes.
So that causes problems, does it not? Because he's supposed to be the first cause.
Sure, right. But I mean...
So it seems like the idea of infinity either has to be completely synonymous with the idea of a God, or it has to follow from the idea of a God. And it seems like you're not super okay with it following from it.
Because he would have had to be infinitely good even in the beginning. I mean, what does infinity mean?
Let's without bounds.
Look, I'm asking unironically.
It's just gonna mean without bound. You can look up what it means from a theological perspective, but
by that token, then infinity is just a privation.
Explain.
You're defining it. You're defining it by a negative. Right? Infinity is without bound.
I see what you're saying.
That may not track.
But even then, that would imply that bounds have to exist before God exists.
What is a bound?
But God isn't bounded, is he? So you need boundedness to exist for unboundedness to exist.
God made bounds, right? Separating the waters from the waters.
The waters from the waters? Is that correct?
Genesis stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you misspoke.
No, he made the heavens and the earth, and it's sort of all conceptualized as water. And then he separated the waters from the waters.
Mm-hmm.
And then, definition. Limitless or endless in space, extent, or size. Impossible to measure or calculate.
That does seem...
Wow, the example is the infinite mercy of God.
Oh.
That's cool.
So, yeah, but even then, I think you have to deny that he's part of the... Then that has to be like... You can't have a precursor necessary requirement for the existence of God. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of God. the whole
Well,
structure of a God.
I don't know. I mean, God is logic, right? Logic isn't something that's created by God. It is God.
Sure.
And the same things the same thing with these other things. But we are called to reflect the divine image, right? This is why the reason that infinite and eternal can't be qualities of God is because if you assume that to be the case, if you assume that they are qualities, which I did for a while, and this was only recently pointed out to me, which is why I haven't worked through all the finer points of it yet. If you assume that to be true, then heaven conceptually doesn't work, because all sin will be removed in heaven, right? All sin will be burned away and we'll be perfect, sinless beings. But either, and sin is misalignment from the divine order, right? Sin is misalignment from God. So to be perfectly righteous is to be in total alignment with God, with the divine image.
But then you...
Right, and
yes.
so in heaven, if you're perfectly sinless, then if you assume that infinite and eternal are qualities, then either you're infinite and eternal plus all the other qualities, and then you are God, which doesn't work because there can only be one God conceptually, or you are finite and not eternal, and then you're sinful because you're not perfectly in the image of God. And so you have to separate time, and you have to separate infinite and eternal as from the qualities. They have to be manners in which the qualities exist instead, because that way you can be in heaven, you can have all the qualities of God perfectly, you can be sinless, you can be perfectly good, loving, truthful, all these things, without being them in the way that God is them, without being them infinitely and eternally. And then it all kind of conceptually fits together. Then it all works, because you can be sinless and also not God. It's not sinful to be finite. But if infinite is a quality, then it is sinful to be finite, and then heaven doesn't work. Although, potentially it could, because we still haven't checked the box of eternal, so you still wouldn't be God. So then the question becomes, do we in some way in heaven become infinite? And I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't read Revelations carefully enough, or recently enough. Maybe there's something about our understanding or consciousness that does sort of gain a sense of infiniteness. I know we get new bodies that aren't tainted by the sin of the physical world, by the fall. And so maybe that comes along with something else. I don't know.
But I feel like, okay, so I'm still looking at it kind of as a causal chain. You've reasonably said that you don't believe it can come after, right? Because qualities come after, correct?
No, God just is the things that he is. Goodness can't come after God, because goodness is God. Okay,
so would you say that, because you've equated a lot of these terms like goodness and beauty and
right, same thing.
Is infinity one of those then? Or infinite one of those?
I don't know. Originally my instinct was to say yes, and then I was corrected on the time thing, and so then my instinct was to say no.
But it can exist without time. Eternal is kind of a combination of an idea of time and infinity. So the idea of eternal follows from infinity.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you can be infinite. You can extend infinitely into time without being eternal, right? Because eternal is you have no beginning and no end. You just always are. And infinite could mean you have a beginning and then you always are. Still qualifies.
I mean, sure. Right, but you could, okay. Yeah, so you'd have to, it would have to be a quality then.
Maybe. I'd...
Because then
maybe infinite is still in there as a quality, and it just eternal that isn't, and that's the separating factor. I don't know. I will have to.
I feel like the only way that works is you would have to equate infinity to God.
I mean, it depends on whether
you equate love to God, for example.
It depends on whether or not infinity exists in and of itself. And I'm not sure about this. Is infinite? I mean.
But okay, but how we wouldn't have any where did that spark come from then? How did the conception of infinity even arrive in the human mind? Or is that not even a true conception?
Well, I mean, you could make the same case for time. It's just a way of. Although I guess your argument is that time makes itself self-evident through matter, and infinity.
Yes, that's kind of tough to say.
It's because we keep going back and forth between infinite and infinity.
Yeah.
But infinity arguably doesn't reveal itself at all in matter.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Does it reveal itself anywhere?
Outside of the divine, my instinct is to say no.
Which I also
right, and so
obviously I'm not a person of faith, but that under your framework that does
right, and so the only way that we but I mean, people did know God, right? And so maybe that's where we get it.
It seems like God is the only way
right.
to
get infinity. But if you glimpse God, then you necessarily assume infinity because God is infinite. And so
sure.
So my question then is, did a concept of infinity exist before God?
I would say yes. I don't think, because I don't equate the two. I don't think infinity and God are.
Well, sure, but I mean, literally, historically, do we have a recorded account of something akin to infinity before
probably
a recorded account of God?
I would imagine so. I mean,
I'm not saying we don't, but I'm curious.
I'd be curious if Hinduism references infinity or something like
right.
that.
Buddhism was my first thought.
Maybe. I'm not going to read the Vedic text or anything.
No, I might ask ChatGPT this later.
Yeah, I would assume so. I think it would. And if there are no accounts, that's a strong argument.
Yeah, that would work out quite nicely.
But yeah, no, I would imagine it would. But also, under that framework, there wouldn't have been a time before God, correct?
Right. And you can assume, we do assume, I think, that God still influenced and made himself known before the events recorded in the Bible. I mean, we get... Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the concept of natural revelation, which is qualities of the divine which are revealed through natural means. We get Plato explaining the transcendentals, for example,
mm-hmm.
which we blame on divine intervention, divine providence, if you will. We were being set up with a framework so that we could interpret the biblical truth that was to be laid out. And it's not like it's not an absolute proof one way or the other, but it would be a thing that would be helpful in conceptualizing it. But anyway.
Yeah, I would imagine it probably doesn't hold. But
as for the question of whether or not infinity exists in and of itself, I mean, what are your thoughts on this as a math guy? Does infinity exist not as a description of another quality?
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree with you.
From a math, well, yeah, because math is inherently structured, so it has to be describing something, right? Like, for example, on a set, right? The only way I can say a set is infinite, but what I'm really saying is that the size of that set is infinite.
Right.
Or the cardinality of it is infinite.
Yeah, and I think the same thing works for God, right? Because he exists infinitely.
But then can you accept infinity as a concept? Is infinity a concept? like true infinity.
I mean, yes, but not in and of itself.
Because I feel like
you can have infinite.
Yeah. I feel like then because this is one of the, I think is this the ontological argument, the causal chain thing, where it's like, well, everything has to have a reason. It's like, okay, well, why does that drawer exist? Because someone built it. Well,
that's
why
the
did someone
argument
build
from
it?
causation. They are very, very similar.
Yeah, but
it took me a while.
It's a very common argument that's used to like try and convey the existence of a god or whatever.
One of Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways.
Yeah.
Which I memorized once and forgot.
But I feel like if you are taking that, argument into consideration, saying that God is a true first cause, I feel like you can't say infinity describes God, because the concept of infinity has to exist before God in the causal chain. So you either have to say God is just inexplicable, which is fair.
I mean, to an extent, this is true. This is doctrinal.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you would necessarily have to assume that infinite precedes God either, because infinite, per what we just laid out, infinite doesn't... We are very blurry.
Oh, boy.
There we go.
Hey!
Infinite doesn't describe God. Infinite describes things that describe God. Right? Existence is a thing that describes God.
But
Love
God,
is a thing that describes God.
God
Truth is a
infinite.
thing that describes God. And infinite is a thing that describes the truth that describes God. And so, like, yes, God is infinite, but in a third order sense. Because there's an implicit, I don't know this kind of linguistic term, there's an implicit thing, though, this thing between them. Like, God is infinite really means for all x, where x is a quality, x is infinite. Sorry, for all x where x is a quality of God, x is infinite.
Okay. Sure. So love, for example.
Right.
Love is infinite. But
and love is God.
Therefore,
right.
God is infinite.
Yes.
Which means infinite has to be a quality of God.
In a third order sense. Right. First order, in the finest resolution, we just have God. In his pure, immaculate conception.
Sure.
Not conception, but...
Are you saying love is second order then?
And so, well... Right, so all the labels that we use to describe God, like truth, beauty, goodness, love, these things, they're imperfect, right? These are human labels. Okay, they're finite. These are because I don't want to say that they're... I mean, the bounds of the term are finite. He loves infinitely, but the concept of love is bound in a way that the concept of God is not bound, right? Because when I say love...
You're saying it's like a means for humanity to even understand.
Yes, exactly. And the reason I backtracked when I said that the terms are imperfect is because they're from the Bible, and the Bible is perfect and divinely inspired. But they...
Is the Bible perfect? The Bible is finite. We can come back
yes. This is what we've been walking through, is that it's not imperfect to be finite. This isn't, because infinite isn't one of the qualities of God. It's just the way that God is his qualities.
So you're saying it's a quality of his qualities. Where does that quality come from then? Because does God invent? Did he create qualities?
I think the concept of infinite... I think infinite really is maybe just... Well, I don't know. That's a tricky question, because infinite would then be my first instinct is to say that infinite is just the natural order of existence, and we only recognize infinite as like a thing because we exist in a finite world, which isn't like we exist in a bounded sense, which is the weird thing.
Yeah.
And so infinite doesn't like really exist. It's just how things, it just is. Infinite and existence are the same, and we exist in a bounded sense, and so maybe that makes us exist less. But then it does sort of become maybe sinful to be finite, because then we don't exist completely.
Before. I don't know if you wanted to explain that again or not, but we
I
mentioned
think I did earlier in this
but
podcast. Walk through the...
You mentioned how time can't... You don't accept
I walked through
time
the whole
thing,
the heaven thing.
Maybe. I'm not sure. But it was in the previous podcast for sure. I know that to be 100% true. So
The consciousness one?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. We 100% walked through why.
Yeah. Well, I think I did in this one too. So
Yeah.
I'll count our bases as covered on that front. But infinity
Infinity?
infinity is a tricky one for this. I don't know exactly.
I feel like you get kind of like cornered into accepting that God is synonymous with infinity. I feel like no matter which way you look at it, that becomes the case.
Well, sure. I mean, right. I mean, God is also...
Like, in a sense that... Well, but you can't... Okay, so... Yeah, because you're saying God has qualities like love, truth, whatever. Or not qualities, but God is those things, but they themselves are finite because they're trying to be conveyed to finite
like
beings,
the
right?
term love is a bounded term in the way that the term God is not a bounded term.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there are bounds on the term God, but the amount that can be understood in the term, well, it's a God is a larger infinity than love is.
Okay.
Here's the tie between the ideas.
But that's the problem,
The
though, right?
largest infinity is God, and then as you go down the chain of qualities of qualities of qualities of God, then the infinities get smaller and smaller, right? Love is a smaller infinity. The concept of love is a smaller infinity than the concept of God because it's more closely bounded, but it's still infinite, and it is, when we say love, we're referring to God. We just we're picking apart. This is why sometimes exactly. Yeah, this is why sometimes I use the term.
But that does imply that God is an infinity, correct? Or is it just a hierarchy, or is it actually talking about infinity structure?
My instinct is to say that infinity doesn't really exist. Because infinity is just the absence of bounds, and bounds only exist because we're finite.
Is it kind of like the good and evil problem?
Maybe, but in reverse. Not even in reverse. Maybe it doesn't.
That brings up some weird stuff.
Well, because I don't. The idea that I'm toying with right now is that infinity doesn't really exist, and that's not to say that it's like evil. It just isn't.
Right, but you can use infinity to express the extent of God's love, correct?
Right, but that's just because it's unbounded, and the only reason... Like I think infinite, conceptually, is just a consequence of our being finite, which is the weird thing. I think because we experience reality through bounds, we see something that's unbounded and we're like, whoa, this must be a thing, a distinct thing. This thing is infinite. This thing exists in an infinite manner. But really, it just exists, and our existence is limited. Like, infinite and existence really would be kind of the same. Like, infinite and being would be the same thing, and we just be less because we're not infinite.
Right. I see what you're saying. I do think that raises some concerns.
particularly in back to the heaven stuff, right? Because then we would have to be infinite in a sense in order to exist perfectly, which we are supposed to do. We're supposed to have perfect being. What was I saying?
You're saying
Infinite.
Conflicts with the idea of
Right,
the
right,
heavens.
right. But I'm not sure that it does, because the implication there is that we have to be infinite in order to exist fully, because existence and infinite really are kind of one and the same. But then in heaven, we don't die, and that is a sort of bounded infinity. We have a beginning, but not an end. And maybe...
Sure. I will say, if you're talking about orders of infinities, that one-sided boundedness of an infinity is equated to a two-sided boundedness. They are the same size infinity. So like from a mathematical perspective, like the natural numbers, whether or not you include 0, some people do, some people don't. I think I do include 0. I don't remember. That size of the natural numbers is the exact same size of the integers, which is doubly infinite. Infinite. So you have singly infinite and doubly infinite. And those two are the same size infinity. So those are equated infinities in terms of their cardinality. So I don't know how that plays into that.
I think it helps minorly.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this all tracks. I think that we do necessarily become infinite in heaven in at least one sense, in the sense of being. And I think that that's the sense. Well, I don't know. I mean, that just refers to time. I don't know. This is very complicated. I will have to meditate on this issue. For now, I will leave it at infinity really is just another term for being, and we will become infinite in heaven in a sense, in at least one sense, in the sense that we will not die, and so we will exist infinitely in one direction.
Gotcha. Okay.
There are issues, there are wrinkles in that I would need to iron out, but I don't think I'm going to do it right now. This will be a multiple day thing.
I see. Yeah, I could...
But yes, this is a fascinating... I appreciate the line of questioning, because you've given me you've given me wrinkles to iron out. That sounds weird.
No, I understand. I think, honestly, I could work through each of those scenarios, and I feel like there is a conclusion.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm sure I will figure
it
out. I'm sure I'll piece this together.
Mm-hmm.
But I need to... Since it's just been raised, I'm too much like in it. I need to step back from it and then just poke at different sides of it instead of diving right into the middle.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll get back to you on this. That's a very interesting... Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were talking about infinity in like a mathematical sense. I don't know, kind of a theological tangent, but I think it was still relevant, actually. Because I was kind of able to interject with my own mathematical stuff. Yeah, I mean, so one thing you could say is that our concept of infinity is just flawed. Like that whole thing where I said, oh yeah, the singly infinite list and doubly infinite list are the same size, and the same size infinity. They have this,
Right.
You can equate the two. But you could also say that our idea of infinity is kind of flawed.
No, necessarily I think it is, because we're finite. In order to fully understand infinity, we would have to be infinite, which we're not.
Sure.
So yeah, it has to be flawed.
Right, and that I will say there are things in math to back that up as well. Hilbert's Hotel is probably the most common.
That's a fun one.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not sure. So I think you either have to deny that infinity exists altogether, or accept that God is just the essence of infinity. I feel like those are the two paths that...
I mean, like I don't think infinity doesn't exist at all. But it's a different thing, I think, conceptually from what order is, for example. Or like truth or whatever, right? Truth is what is.
Mm-hmm.
Order is logic, for example. The necessary way that all things are and occur. And infinite, I'm sticking with my third order thing. I don't think infinite is like a thing in the same way that order or truth are things.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like infinite is a thing that describes things that describe the thing. I think it's a third order instead of a second order. I'm sticking with that. I think infinite, it's one of two options. I agree with you on the two option thing. I don't think the two options are either it doesn't exist or it's a quality of God, though. I think
I'm not saying it is a quality of God. I'm saying it is God.
Well, sure. I mean, God is his qualities.
Sure.
I think either it's tantamount to being, they're one and the same, or it's a third order descriptive term. It's a third order descriptive term. And so it's a thing that describes the things that God is.
Okay.
Like eternal. God isn't infinite. God is good infinitely.
I see. That's interesting, because if that is the case, like, you have these concepts like love and truth and whatever, right? That
Right.
you yourself said were like kind of, nice as like a way to bridge the gap to humanity's understanding of what God is.
Right.
But infinity isn't. You can't conceptually think of infinity, but you can conceptually think of what love is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that is the case, there's a chain where you can understand something, but then something that follows you can't understand. So then you either have to say that infinity isn't a true infinity, or that the one above it. Yeah, it's interesting, because like then you couldn't fully understand love, you can't fully understand truth, you can't fully understand any of that.
Which I think is
Which
probably
is true,
true.
but where along the chain do you start understanding things then?
I don't think we do perfectly. I don't think we can really perfectly understand anything save
So where does
divine
any amount of
revelation.
understanding come from there?
Divine revelation. Holy Spirit.
Sure, say you're a Christian and you haven't had any divine intervention. Or,
Yes,
whatever.
revelation.
Yeah. Where does that come from then?
I mean, it comes from a lack of seeking wisdom, I think.
Well, no, but you could say, like, you're fully on board. Like, say you're yourself right now, but you never had.
Well, and I don't claim to have had any divine revelation on these things. I guess that's not true, because when you get a glimpse of the divine, you do sort of feel these things. I've talked to you about how I felt truth in my vision, and it was weird, but I did not do drugs. I don't do that.
So my question is, where does that even come from? Where does that feeling come from? Because you're taking the intangible and translating it to the tangible.
Yeah, I mean, it straight from God, I think, is what it has to come from. And I do feel like I sort of understand, obviously not completely because it's infinite and we aren't, but I do feel like I kind of understand more what they are. As I study the word, I understand more what love really is. As I learn more about what is true, I understand more about truth. As I felt it, I have come to know it as an essence rather than a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the idea in the faith, there's a division between justification and sanctification. So justification is when you are like qualified to go to heaven. It's when you commit yourself and your sins are paid for by the blood of Jesus. Sanctification is what follows that. So once you're justified, okay, so now legally speaking you're sinless because your sins have been paid for by the imputed righteousness of Jesus, but you still suck.
Sure.
So then sanctification, once you do that, once you're justified, then the Holy Spirit comes to you, and then you undergo a process of sanctification, which I believe is lifelong, which is where you slowly get made better and more like Jesus, because because in your justification, your will has changed to pursue him. And so over time you get better and more sanctified and more Christ-like. And I think that also means that over time you have more and more of an understanding of all of these things, of all this stuff. So it's not like a binary, I don't think it's like you don't understand it, then you have divine revelation, now you understand it. I think it's like over the course of your life, you're kind of shown what these things are to the best of the ability that we can be shown them.
Right, so would you say that, like, you said that you felt truth. Did you feel truth? Or just, like, lowercase t truth?
Capital T.
And you understood it?
Not completely, but I experienced it.
So what do you have after that?
It's really weird, man. It's really weird. I mean, it's sort of similar to...
You felt truth, and considering that you haven't forgotten about it, it seems like you remember truth. So what is that thing that you remember then? If not capital T truth, because you said capital T truth is incomprehensible to humans, because capital T truth is God.
Right, capital T truth is infinite, and I don't think that we can fully conceptualize it, but I do think that we can experience it, and I do think that we can sort of piece together a description of it in the same way that we can piece together a description of God by using terms like truth, love, whatever.
Okay.
And so if you're asking what truth is experientially, the best I can impart it, the adjectives that came to mind after I experienced it when I was trying to describe it, when I was writing it down, were I felt like right. I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I felt like a sort of correctness, but not like correctness as in you're right about something, but it's like when you, I don't know, I feel like I have gotten hints of this before. Yeah. There's like you do something or you're somewhere or with someone or whatever, and it just feels right. It feels like it's as it should be.
Yes.
And it was like that, but...
Yeah, it's like
but deeper. It was like that, but absolute.
I see what you're saying. I think you brought this up before. It's like I think I can kind of understand that. I remember when we were in Cedar City at that park, just playing hacky sack.
That was great. That's fun.
And it felt like, yes, this is
where I should be. This is what I should be doing. This is what this is what ought to be. Mm-hmm. Right? And this makes sense because truth is alignment with reality. Truth is alignment with what is, and God is the root of all being, and so truth is alignment with God. Truth is the opposite of sin. And so it makes 100% that experientially truth would feel like being where you're supposed, like everything being as it's supposed to be, because sin is being not as it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And we're always a little bit sinful, which means we're always a little bit not how and where we're supposed to be. And so my experience of God, I think was sort of just like a brief sort of window into everything being as it should be. I don't know. Maybe even it wasn't absolute capital T truth, because the vision was like, it was in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It was the future of life, not the afterlife. And so I don't know, maybe it was just closer to true. Maybe it was just more true than now is true. And it was so much more true that I
Mm-hmm.
experienced it as this
it seems,
profound absolute. But maybe
seems
it
like
wasn't.
if it was absolute truth, you wouldn't actually be able to comprehend it. And it seems like you have comprehended it.
Sort of. I can't
Or do you think that these are
conceptualize or articulate. This is like the best way that I can sort of try to impart to you roughly what it was like to experience, but I'm shooting around a target.
Right, yeah. I'm not like, saying that, I'm not like trying to undermine your experience or anything.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out under that framework what exactly was it.
Right. I think probably it was capital T, because I think while the vision was of something on the earth, was of the future of life, I think future of my life, to be clear, not like some crazy sci-fi thing. But I think at the same time it was an experience of God. One of my friends, when I told him about it, his first response was like, dude, you were graced with the Holy Spirit. I don't remember exactly what he said, but like you saw or felt the Spirit or something. You were overcome with the Spirit, maybe? Washed with the Spirit? I don't know. But so I think it was as much an experience of God as it was a vision of the future. I think the vision came from the Spirit, but I think also the Spirit was with me and in me at that moment, and so what I was feeling was in part from the vision, but also was in part from the Spirit that was in me. And so I think the sensation of truth, the feeling of absolute truth, was my feeling the Spirit, not necessarily my feeling the feelings of the vision.
Gotcha. Okay.
But again, these are all guesses. I really have no idea.
Fair enough. I do still think that does... My whole idea is, okay, do you think that was like... Because is the Holy Spirit truth?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Capital T truth.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that if you were shown absolute truth, say you have a lowercase t truth meter, right?
Okay.
And you were shown absolute truth, do you think your meter would move at all? Do you think it would go up?
Like by exposure, you would see truth and then you would become more true?
Your understanding of truth would go up.
I think so. I think to an extent, and I think it did.
Okay. Because you've kind of already explained it before, and I keep asking essentially the same question, but through a different lens. But I'm wondering how that translation functions. That translation of being shown absolute truth and getting a concept of what truth is, because that's never gonna be a perfect concept.
Right.
But then what is it that you're gaining? We can call it lowercase t truth.
I think part of the disparity here is the disparity between our perceptions here. The fallout in our communication with this is I think you can experience something without understanding it, and I do think that you can take things away from that experience. Maybe sensation runs a tad deeper than conception. I think you can feel things and retain them more deeply than you can understand it. Someone can tell you all about what it feels like to be punched in the face,
mm-hmm.
and they can describe it super clearly, and you can get a really good vision in your head, but then you're punched in the face and you're like, whoa, okay, so this is what it feels like.
Right.
And I feel like this is sort of similar. It's like you can learn a lot about truth.
Okay, so your experience though was absolute truth, and that's kind of a punch in the face here. But you don't understand it still.
No, but I know what it feels like. You know what I mean?
So you know a part of it, but you don't know all of it.
Well, okay, so let's take the opposite example, right? You get punched. You've never seen anything impact anything else.
Okay, sure.
You have no idea what mechanisms make things impact other things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get punched in the face.
Okay.
You don't really understand what happened. You don't know how that thing hit you. You don't know why it hurt. You don't understand how any of this happened. You don't have an understanding of physics. But
sure.
Or even maybe you're like really stupid and you don't have an understanding of intentionality. You don't get that things do things to an end, that agents act upon other agents to an end.
Yeah.
So you don't understand what just happened, but you got hit and you felt it and you know what it feels like. You can still kind of conjure that feeling in your mind a little bit.
But
even though you don't understand
that feeling
it.
Isn't the thing, is it?
No, it's an experience of the thing. You know what the sensation of it feels like.
I think that does make sense. It would have to be under that model of like lowercase t truth then. We can call it whatever you want.
Sure, but I mean
capacity for understanding.
Right, the punch
what truth
in the face
is or what it feels, because you could say there's a meter for what it feels like and how much you understand it.
The punch in the face is a punch in the face, but you're not wrong. What you remember is the sensation of being punched in the face, not the punch in the face itself, I think. And so in the same way, what I remember from this isn't absolute truth itself, it's the feeling of absolute truth. I remember the sensation of being in the presence of absolute truth. And I can tell you what that's like, and that's what I'm kind of doing. But I can't tell you what absolute truth is in full.
Mm-hmm.
I can try.
But does that mean that your understanding of absolute truth, if a meter can even be given to it, did that move at all?
Sure,
or I think I'm the same.
I think I'm closer than I was before having experienced that, because experiencing something sort of breathes life into your understanding of it, right? If you learn a lot about soccer, but you've never played soccer, you understand it less well than if you learn about a lot about soccer and then you go play soccer. You will understand a lot of finer points about soccer that you just didn't that didn't quite like register or sink in until you experienced it. So I think, I don't understand all of absolute truth, but I've been a student of truth my whole life. I've always been pursuing truth and wisdom, and I think experiencing absolute truth breathed some life into my understanding of it and brought me a little bit closer to a conception.
Is there even a concept of closer in that case then?
Sure, that's what the lowercase is.
Okay, so we are accepting the lowercase then.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I'm happy with that. And you would say that the experience of absolute truth would then follow from the existence of absolute truth itself?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I think that holds.
How did that relate to what we're talking about?
I don't remember. I don't remember exactly how that tied back in, but it was...
I'm not complaining. It was very interesting. Yeah. And I'm always happy to recount my vision. I feel like that sort of... Because that's definitely the deepest religious experience I've had. And I feel like actual substantive religious experiences are some of the best marketing we in the faith have. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because the reason I asked was it kind of relates to infinity, as most things do. In that your capacity to... Well, because, okay, so... We also have a different... I think this whole time we've been thinking about infinity as, infinitely large. From our conception of what large is, right?
I think...
For example, the capacity of love, or, God's love, is infinite. correct?
Like
We're thinking that of
infinitely-
like in one direction.
Infinitely extending, I like better than large, but I'm with you.
Sure, right? But then you can also think of infinity as in different ways. You can think of something that's infinitely small, right? Or infinitesimal.
Right.
How does that? Do you think there are any? Is there anything to learn from that, or is it just?
I mean, I think that sort of qualifies the idea of infinite not being a thing in and of itself, but a descriptor of another thing, because something can be infinitely large and infinitely small. So the X is clearly the quality. Infinite is just a manner in which the quality exists.
Does that exist on the same order as the other infinity then, if you're assuming a third order?
Right, it would. Because you have like the thing that's being described, and then you have the way that you're describing it, and then infinity would be third order. It would be the manner in which the thing that's describing the thing that is being described exists. There's probably a better way to say that.
Okay, so my question then would be like, say you had some quality that was of an infinitesimal extent. Not size, extent. Well, I guess it just wouldn't exist then. I was going to ask and see if that quality of
You're
being
asking for something
infinitesimal is
absolutely
in the same order as the other infinity.
I mean, it would have to be, right? Because if it's absolutely infinitesimally small, then it still has to exist by definition. It has to be because it is infinitely small. Like small implies.
So does
that
the concept of infinitesimality, which is actually the word, I looked it up.
Nice.
Does that even exist? Well, does infinity even exist? I guess it's the same question.
Yeah, you're asking for the for an object smaller than which no object could be conceived.
Yeah.
Which, like, fair enough. I'm sure that there is such an object.
Oh, you do?
An object than which no smaller object can be conceived.
Well, it depends on how what you're quantifying as being that object. Like, I could say that this nitrogen atom.
But you could conceive of a smaller object than that.
Sure.
We're talking about the limit.
So you do, yeah, okay.
And
well, our universe is finite, which means there is an absolute answer to that.
Sure. At any given moment, but it's infinitely extending over time.
It wouldn't be a limit then, right? Because if our universe is finite,
that's the lower limit of how small of the size of things.
Well, it wouldn't be a relevant limit. You could say a limit as it goes to negative infinity of a thing. It wouldn't be negative infinity, but it'd be zero actually.
Right, zero would be the limit because zero is not existing.
Zero would be the thing you're approximating towards.
Right.
It wouldn't be the limit itself.
And so
the limit itself would actually be something if our universe is finite.
Fair enough, yes.
So, like, I could keep going down and say, like, okay, I'm looking at nitrogen dioxide, this molecule.
Exclusive limit.
We'll get to that. So I have nitrogen dioxide, like a molecule. I'm at a molecule level. Is there something smaller than this? Well, yeah. What about the nitrogen atom inside that molecule?
Right.
And then if I break that down, what about all these subatomic particles that make up the nucleus of the nitrogen atom?
I think quarks are the smallest thing we have right now, we've found.
Yeah, right. But is there a smallest quark? Probably, right?
I thought they were all the same size.
So then there is a smallest thing in the universe then.
Well, I mean, we don't know that it doesn't get smaller than quarks. We don't know that quarks aren't composed of something.
But is the universe fine? Well, I guess...
I mean, like, finite doesn't necessarily mean not infinitely reducible, right? There's a finite amount of space between me and you, but
but you can infinitely subdivide it.
Yeah, that step.
It's the
thing.
Clapping hands problem.
Yes.
Like if you half
the distance, right?
I'm going to pass all those intervals, but I will never.
Right.
Which I find that argument to be kind of stupid, I'll be honest. But it's interesting. But from a math perspective, it's kind of.
I agree.
No, but that does bring up the question. Okay, so is there a quality? Because the reason why I'm asking that is there a quality of the universe that you can absolutely say is infinite?
Probably not.
So then there would have to be a smallest object in the universe.
Sure, yeah. I
Right?
think that all tracks. I think creation is necessarily finite. I don't like...
Is it?
Because if infinite is... Like, if we're talking about size, and infinite is infinite size, and God is infinite, then you can't fit another... it's like... it's like you get two large Home Depot boxes, and you're trying to put one of the large Home Depot boxes into the other large Home Depot box, and it won't.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like because God is infinite, the universe has to be finite in order to,
Right,
be
and
created.
I do think the universe is finite. But I also think time kind of muddies that water a little bit. Because obviously you're like, okay, well, if you're thinking of time as a dimension, right? Well, of course, like right now the dimension is finite, but you can like increase a slider from your time scale. It'll keep going on and on and on and on. And now you do have like if I'm looking at it like mechanistically as like our three spatial dimensions, I could say yes, it's finite because there's not, because the universe is expanding. But if I took a freeze frame of the universe right now, we have finite space. But that's only in reference to the three spatial dimensions. If I looked at it as time as being a dimension, which I'm not sure if that's actually, or space-time, for example, as being a dimension, I could drag that and it would change then. What happens if you put a freeze on every single one of those sliders then? But I think the sliders have to go with each other? If you increase time, I think they necessarily have to follow each other in their own expansion.
Time and space.
Time, space-time, and also every other... There's like 9 or so dimensions that have been theorized in the universe, but it's not. It's more than 4. I know that for sure. Because I think space-time is considered the 4th dimension.
I would like to backtrack for a moment because I realized with my cardboard box argument that I implied that the universe is inside of God, and I don't know if I'm ready to make that conjecture. So I'm just going to put a big ol' asterisk next to that one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Moving back forward.
Okay, so I think then you would have to say, well,
The question is, are they necessarily correlated?
Yeah, because I'm trying to come to a conclusion that the universe is necessarily finite. Is what I'm trying to come to. But
right.
It's kind of tough to come to that conclusion because I'm trying to like adjust things as if they are variables, like the size of the universe being, the size in this direction, whatever.
I mean, you could literally go to the edge of the universe in any given direction, can you not?
You could, but you'd have to freeze time. You'd have to freeze the progression of space-time.
This is all hypothetical anyway. If you travel faster than light...
Freezing the progression of space-time freezes your own expansion of space, of three-dimensional space. But so if you're freezing one, you have to freeze the other. You see what I mean?
Right, if you freeze time, then you freeze space's expansion.
Yes.
If you freeze the... What's weird about that is that it suggests that time isn't moving, it's expanding. Which is funky.
Which I think does actually hold. I think that does. I would have to look into this. I'm actually curious. I will look into this later, but... Yeah, I'm not sure. I would have to look into that. That whole problem.
Well,
I mean, because I want to say that the universe is entirely finite. That makes sense to me.
There's something eating the universe, yes?
Potentially. I promise. I remember Paul Davies' novel. I don't remember all the parts of it, but
So hypothetically, if the thing that's eating the universe were to eat it faster than it were expanding, then you would have an inverse correlation between the expansion of time and the expansion of space.
to be fair, I think that thing that is potentially eating the universe isn't like devoid of space. I don't believe. It still is part of the universe. It's not like you have a hole in the universe, I don't believe.
Then what does that even mean?
I don't remember exactly what it is. I would have to look into it again. It's been like over a year since I read that.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Weird.
It's been a while.
Well, okay, so we can even, like, let's say we're setting up for Big Bang number 2, right, and matter starts imploding.
Oh, you're thinking about like oscillating universe theory?
Sure.
Sure.
Right, and the universe is collapsing in on itself, and it's coming to one point.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you get the same thing where once the universe was this large, it is. Although I guess in that conception, you don't actually get less stuff; it's just more dense. That's kind of why the explosion happens.
That would also imply that if space-time, and three-dimensional space expand at the same rate, or expand in correlation with each other, that if it were collapsing in on itself, then time would be reversing.
Which I don't think
that
works.
Yeah.
I think time is
So time
purely
has
conceptual.
to be,
I don't think time exists.
maybe. Then what? Okay.
Which is funky.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look into this.
And I don't mean that in like the hippie-ish sort of way where it's
Yeah.
like only the present exists.
You're
and
saying
the
time is a
future
derived-
and the past don't exist. But right, it's like
it's derivative of our
time
own
only
experience.
exists insofar as we observe that this thing was this way and now it is this way.
Mhm.
Like time itself, I don't think is any sort of tangible thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would have to look into that. I'm not entirely sure about that.
Whoa. We're very much in the weeds.
Yeah, a little bit. I think we should
You
climb
wanna
out of the swamp.
Pivot one more time and then call it.
I think
maybe?
we actually covered most of it. Let me just run through these again. Just you know.
I guess we
just
could
in
hit your
case.
dualism thing.
Yeah, the dualism thing I would need to flesh out more though. I was thinking about it last night in the shower. Actually, I was thinking about I could probably write a book about this.
Oh, I meant your characterizing each as a god.
Oh yeah, as in like a it was kind of a I don't know. It was more like a oh my god if someone made a game based off of this idea, like a video game. This would be a really cool concept. But I was thinking about how like you could have a god representing infinity and a god representing randomness that are constantly pulling at each other.
Which is like not far from biblical conception because God is order
and randomness is chaos.
And infinity, and the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Mm-hmm.
He is the father of lies. All of these things are chaos and randomness, which is non-existence. The thing is, the devil's not a god. He is a subordinate to God. You can't, because God necessarily implies singular absolute being, and you can't have two of those, because then they're not singular or absolute.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it agrees with the Christian framework.
No, I mean the conceptual framework of a god. I don't think you can have more than one god per the definition of God.
Sure. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the way you've conceptualized God and stuff, I don't think it can agree with it, and which is why it doesn't.
Insightful.
But I do think, depending on how you are defining God, I think you can. I don't think even I struggle with the idea that God even can be defined.
Yeah, it's more like the identification thing we were talking. I really have been pronouncing things weird today. The identification thing we were talking about last time, where it's like we can't really define God, but we can identify God. We can see, like this thing's God, love is God. Goodness this is another thing. That's also God.
Yeah.
But we can't like get a clear picture of what fully God is.
Yeah. So
this really worked out way more theological than I was expecting.
Well, it's just because of infinity, and the nature of infinity is it's just going to lead to those types of arguments.
I was expecting to sit here and listen to you talk about fun math stuff for an hour.
I mean,
which is fine.
I could, but a lot of the problem with math is I like asking about the nature of infinity. I can't quantify that during math. I have to accept things under the framework of math so that they become useful. But if I'm discussing infinity, that is kind of the bounds of math. I'm not like in the framework of math where I can just kind of roll with it. Right. I'm discussing the nature of what math even is, which is just inherently gonna.
Well, so let's throw you a fun mathy infinity thing to talk about real quick. So the different sizes. So how is an unbound infinity the same size as a singularly bound infinity?
So, if I can ramble about math here for a second,
that's the goal.
We call those these infinities countable or uncountable infinities. Something that is an uncountable infinity is something like real numbers, right? That's why. Yes. I have to remember the official definition in my head. Hold on.
As opposed to remembering it outside your head.
But yeah, I believe that's correct. It's been a while. I could also pull up my notes on it directly, and I could give you a better, like an official definition if you wanted, because I know exactly where to find them.
Send it.
I might just do that. But in essence, it defines it as having a function. The reason why those two are the same is that it defines it as having a function that you can map one of the values, or one, like starting from one value to the other value. Right, so you could have a discrete function that says, hey, if I take an input from this singly linked list, sorry, that's computer science, of singly infinite list, to a doubly infinite list, if I can map it and it spans the entirety of it, then it's the same size infinity. So, for example, if I'm doing natural numbers and I'm including 0. I could say, okay, well, let's make a function that says if it's 0 in the natural numbers, let's just say that it's 0 in the integers, right? Which makes sense. You're mapping 0 to 0 between singly and doubly. And then let's take 1 and let's map it to 1. And then let's take 2 and let's map it to -1. And then 3 will map to 1. And then 3 will map to 2, 4 will map to -2. And you can make a function where that's the case. Mm-hmm. You can design a function where that'll do it, and you can kind of see as one grows in one direction, the other one grows in both directions. So if you can essentially create a map from each value of 1 to each value of the second one, they're the same size infinity. Which is why, when you're doing the diagonalization proof, if you can conceive of something that's outside of that map, right? Because we literally create a chart, and we're conceiving of something that is outside of that chart, no matter how long the chart goes for, that means there cannot be a function that goes from one to the other. Which means that one is larger than the other one.
Why do you conceive of... What justifies your mapping of, like, 2, for example, to -1 on the other one? The implication is that the first one then is growing twice as fast as the second one is growing.
Sure, but it spans it infinitely. The speed at which you cover something infinitely does not matter.
This is where I was getting caught up before.
It does not matter at the speed of which, because it'll span it. So it doesn't matter how like quickly it is because time doesn't exist here.
Right, the infinity is already in the.
It just
infinity is already instantiated.
You're creating a structure that already
and so
is.
what varies by speed is just your conception of the infinity.
That's
not
just
the
you
infinity
calculating
of
it
itself.
and being able to
Right.
understand it yourself. But what you're creating already inhabits that.
Right.
Like instantly. It
I'm with
already
you.
is.
Yes, I'm with it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, that's how you would quantify those two lists being the same, whether the doubly or singly infinite. And the way we formalize that is with a function. We define a function based off of a set, and then we define a set, and it goes down the whole chain of in terms of discrete.
But if you
mathematics.
bring decimals into it, then it's a different size infinity.
Yes.
Why?
Well, you have to if you're comparing real numbers. So that's where infinitesimality messes with things when it comes
Full
to
run out of that word.
Yeah. It messes with things in that regard. Like great. It's really throws a wrench in the gears. Is that a term?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. So I mean I could walk through the diagonalization proof if you wanted, but it might not carry across with just my voice. But essentially, if you try and map the natural numbers starting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and write down like an infinite decimal or just a real number for each of those things, you can then go diagonally and add 1 to each place and then come up with a decimal that will never appear on that chart, which means there is something that cannot be mapped. Right? No matter how far you go, there's just a number that you can conceive of that cannot be mapped under any natural number, which means that a function can't be created, which means that is uncountable. And uncountable, I realized, is beyond that first order of infinity. That's all uncountable means. So countable would be something like the real numbers, but the natural numbers.
Right.
But something uncountable would be the real numbers, because it is greater than the natural numbers. The natural numbers are what define something to be countable. If it's a larger infinity than the natural numbers, then it is considered uncountable.
The reason being that then you're introducing division into the spaces. Then you have an infinitely small point between each interval.
Sure, but you can also map, but also the not division. It's not division. Because
Sure, I mean you have an infinitely small space between each interval.
Because I believe the set of rational numbers, which is anything that can be represented as a fraction, is actually the same size as natural numbers, I believe.
Okay.
I believe that's the case. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
But real is just decimals, yeah?
Real is decimals, but also it includes irrational numbers.
Right, so like
pi.
So if you have 1 to 2, there's you have a line at 1 and you have a line at 2. And if you're doing the real number thing, then you have 1, and then there is an infinite number of lines between 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like an infinity nested in the infinity, and so it's uncountable.
Sure, but Hilbert's Hotel does tell us that whether infinities can exist in infinities doesn't actually change the size of said infinity.
Wait, so you're telling me the point of the hotel thing was that it's the same size? I thought the point was that it got bigger even though it's still infinite.
I believe it is. I believe the point of Hilbert's Hotel is to say that it is the exact same infinity. I believe.
This stuff bugs me. Do you want to run them through the thing real quick?
Through Hilbert's Hotel?
Yeah.
I could, but I don't actually
like you
know
can-
if I remember it well enough to explain it super well. I could go through I could read a formal definition of it real quick.
Sure.
But I don't know if I'd be able to explain it well enough.
I feel like it's relatively intuitive.
Let me look this up real quick.
Give me a chance to read the definition of infinity. Oh, dude. Why do we even use modern dictionaries? So this would have been super helpful. 1828 Webster's Dictionary defines infinity as without limits, unbounded, boundless, not circumscribed, applied to time, space, and qualities. It goes on to say, God is infinite in duration, having neither beginning nor end of existence. He is also infinite in presence or omnipresence, and his perfections are infinite. We also speak of infinite space. So yeah, it's the third order thing. I was right. Dictionary says so.
Okay.
I love that it specifically goes over the theological
That's like exactly
discussion.
what we were talking about.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. I gotta get one of these. It'd be so much more fun to pull it out in a physical...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's crazy. How spot on it is
Yeah.
with our... Huh. They saw us coming.
So I believe, so Hilbert's Hotel is trying to, it's essentially another explanation for why the infinities of the natural numbers are the same size as the integers.
Why the infinities of the natural... Oh, well, explain how. What is the hypothetical?
Okay, so...
What's the thought experiment?
Hilbert's Hotel is essentially, imagine a hotel that has infinite rooms, right?
Done.
If you wanted to add one person, right, you wanted to add like an extra person, you need to find another person a room, right? Someone shows up to the hotel, they want a room.
Well, I mean...
How do you do that?
An infinite number of rooms, all of which are full.
All of which are full. Yes, I should preface that. All of the rooms are full. And it's singly infinite. So we're assuming there's a first room.
Right.
How do you... I'm just going to walk you through this. I assume you know the answer to it. But like, how do you accommodate for one extra person wanting a room in the hotel?
I mean, the easy answer is to have everyone move down a room.
Exactly. So you tell the person in room 1 to move to room 2. Person in room, and as he goes to move to room 2, he tells the person from room 2 to move to room 3. And you get everyone moving one space to the right or left, whichever way you're doing it. And now, hey, room 1 is now open. You can add a person to that. But now, say you wanted to add 5 people to that room, right? How would you do that? Well, you can just repeat that same thing 5 times.
Right, or you have people do the Skippy thing.
Sure, yeah.
But,
you could tell a person from room 1 to move to room 5, and then 5 to 10, and then 2 would go to room 6, and then from 6 to 11.
Yeah.
You can just tell people to move to their corresponding rooms, and you can make 5 extra rooms. Bam, we can accommodate for that. Yeah. So if it's finite, it's pretty intuitive to see how you could make room for a finite number of new guests. For infinitely many guests, it gets a little bit more complicated, but you still can accommodate for an infinite number of guests. Because you can have people move to certain rooms such that it'll be empty room, occupied room, empty room, occupied room, empty room, occupied room.
Right.
And now you have alternating ones. So now you have infinitely many new rooms for an infinite number of guests, right? But if you look at the hotels, right, the hotels are the same. You've added infinity to something that's infinite, but it's the same size infinity because you have the same number of hotel rooms.
I wonder if this is I wonder if this is just a sort of conceptual, just contains a sort of error or contradiction at its conception. Because
I mean, some people consider it to be a paradox, so very much so, yeah.
Necessarily you end up with more people than rooms. You end up with an overflow.
You don't have more. There isn't a concept of more. It's infinite.
But if you have we went over this before too. If you have an infinite number of rooms and all of them are full,
yeah,
there is one person per room. There's a ratio of 1 to 1.
Well, you're quantifying something that isn't quantifiable.
No matter how many rooms or people there are, there's one person per room. There's a ratio of 1 person per each room. There's an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of people, but they're the same number.
Infinity is not a number. That's the problem. Yeah, that's like one of the defining characteristics of how infinity is defined in math. That is like, if you say that in an upper level math class, they'll immediately correct you. Infinity is not a number.
Okay, there are necessarily as many people as rooms because there's one person in each room.
You're still putting a number. Maybe not, you're not actually putting a discrete number to it, but you are putting a number to it, which is not how infinity works. Does that make sense? Like,
no. There's some number of rooms.
No, there isn't.
It's an infinite number. The rooms infinitely extend, but there is a quantity of rooms. How about that?
No, I mean, it's not. Quantity and number are like the same exact thing, basically. This is the problem, which is why it's very difficult for people to understand. This is why it's like brought up all the time. But it is, you can't think of it as quantifying it. You have to think of it as a recurrent. Like, it's like I can't understand infinity. It's kind of you know how induction works, right?
Yeah.
If I can prove for P of n and P of n plus 1, I can then, or if I can prove that P of n plus 1 is correct, then it'll exist for everything, right?
If you can derive P of n plus 1 from P of n, right, then
P of n and P of 1. So you have to prove that it works for one example, and then you have to prove that if you're assuming that it works for every example, then you should prove that it works for every example's successor.
Right. Right, yes.
So you have to assume that it works for everything, and if it does work for everything, then it should work for everything's successor.
Is this the same way that we use it in logic?
Yeah.
Because in logic, there's like a deductive argument where you prove something to be necessarily true. Not necessarily, I guess, necessarily. But, but like you prove something to be true.
Mm.
And inductive is not a proof. You can show something to have inductive strength or weakness, but it's not.
Well, there's strong induction
provable.
And weak induction. Those are two different things in math as well. So strong induction, I believe.
Sure, inductive reasoning is just reasoning that's not deductive. It's not something you can formally prove.
Right. Well, you can
assume it based
that's actually
on
that's the interesting part. It's that is like in math. If you can prove that it is inductively true, then it is true. Usually, it comes up with sums and other infinite things.
What differentiates inductive from deductive then, if they're both proven?
Well, deductive is different. Because deductive doesn't work with infinities. Deductive means that you have an eventual thing you're trying to get to. Right, so you can follow the chain, but that chain should be finite, I believe. Inductive is like, hey, if I can prove that the chain works here, and in theory prove that it works for every single successor, so like, if I have a slider, I can prove that the chain starts somewhere, right?
Right.
The chain starts somewhere.
Yes.
I'm going to take a slider and put it somewhere, and we make it arbitrary, which means it doesn't depend on where it is. It can be anywhere along that list. It just has to be somewhere. So we make it arbitrary. We call it P of n, right? Because we don't care what n is. We just want to have that abstraction of n.
Mm-hmm.
If we can then prove the one after, P of n plus 1, no matter where that is, we can then prove that then, like say P of n plus 1 was our P of n. Then we can prove the P of n plus 2. And then say P of n plus 2 is our P of n. Then we can prove P of n plus 3, right? From the original definition of P of n. So then we can prove the entire chain. So then we're taking a point on the chain, making an abstraction based off of an arbitrary point on that chain and proving that it goes beyond that point. And because it's arbitrary, we can prove that the entire chain exists.
This feels different, but maybe my knowledge of logical induction is just not as thorough as it ought to be.
And I believe, I want to say that strong induction, I believe weak induction is, I think it's the difference is between singly and doubly. Whether the chain is singly or doubly infinite. I want to say that that's the difference, but I don't know for sure.
I should have brought my logic notebook. Because when I Google it, the first thing that comes up is inductive reasoning is a logical method that uses specific observations to draw general conclusions or principles. And I remember that my professor specifically said that that's a bad definition that gets used a lot, but I don't remember what the good one is.
They could be different. I mean, they could very well be different.
This seems better. Surprisingly, the Wikipedia definition seems better. Inductive reasoning refers to a variety of methods of reasoning in which the conclusion of an argument is supported not with deductive certainty, but with some degree of probability.
Then it's different then.
Okay.
It would be a different thing. I think the idea is similar, but it's a different thing. Because we know in math that if you have proved it via induction, it's a valid proof.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. Because I think it has to deal with the difference between math and logic.
What's the difference between math and logic?
That's a whole nother question.
It is.
I'm not entirely sure how you would define that.
Well, anyway. What were we talking about?
Majestic right now on this camera.
I know. I was going to point it out earlier, but you were...
I was deep in the weeds.
What just beeped?
Chair.
Beep.
I slid the chair and it beeped.
Really?
Yeah, it made a beep-like sound.
Weird.
Anyway, so yeah, that's essentially how...
You really do have some like heavenly lighting going on.
I know. I'm loving it, man. So yeah, that's how mathematical induction works, and I believe if that's how I guess like your I guess formal philosophy definition of induction is, then it is fundamentally different.
Interesting. Why were we talking about that?
Because I was explaining Hilbert's Hotel, and I'm explaining like essentially if you can repeat that pattern of like having somebody move over and over and over again. Then you can prove that there is still like an extra space there. It would be inductively proven, but you can prove it. Which is probably why it's difficult for you, because your idea of induction is different. You would say that no, there's always going to be a gap, or no, there's always going to be a discrepancy in value, but there is no value.
Like there's necessarily, even with an unbounded number of people, there's still a ratio of people.
You can't place a ratio to something that is not a number.
There's a ratio in the bounds of the question. One person per room is a ratio.
Right, and it helps us understand the situation, but it's not. It's almost like I could just make it like a switch instead. I could have like, hey, the light switch is on in this room versus not in this room. It doesn't really matter. I feel like that just helps us as people understand the situation. But I could still come up with a formal structure for that. My
conjecture here is that the hypothetical itself is an impossibility.
Well, yes.
Is a contradiction.
Well, it's an impossibility if we've never realized that situation, but I do think
I think it's conceptually impossible.
Really?
Because for the reason that I'm laying out, because in the framework of the hypothetical, we get a ratio of 1-to-1, one person for each room. There's an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of people, and there is a person in each room. So
I take issue with using a ratio. A ratio does not mean anything here.
Read the question again.
Yep. Initially, every room is occupied.
Every room is occupied. There's an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of people, and every room is occupied.
Yeah.
How do you not read that as a ratio?
Okay, let me read it like another thing, right? It's not that it is a ratio, because I'm not equating. You're taking two lists, a list of people and a list of rooms, and equating. Right. I'm saying that these rooms just have people in them.
Uh-huh.
It's a quality of the rooms. So think about it like numbers. I'll use numbers because it's easier than rooms.
Okay.
Say I have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going on, right?
Yes, numbers.
Positive integers.
Okay.
I want to add 0 to that list. What can I do to add 0 to that list? Say, because 0 is interesting, right? 0 is one of a kind in the number line. It is the origin.
Bars.
It's the origin. It's like a very important number, 0.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very clearly unique, right? In a lot of senses, just like a room, just like a room without a person would be unique in that timeline, right? So if I said, okay, we'll go to every number and subtract 1, and it goes, okay, so the whole list becomes 1 goes to 0, 2 goes to 1, 3 goes to 2. And now you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you've added this really unique thing to something but it's still the same length because all you've done is applied a function to every room.
Right, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But the problem is that these aren't rooms. These aren't physical spaces.
I'm aware, but if your quality was whether or not that number is 0 or not, say that's what you're defining that quality of the room to be, is that it's just... does it have somebody or does it not have somebody? But each person is different from the next. You could say that, right? Just like how every positive integer would be different from the next.
Right. But, I mean, I don't think this works in the hypothetical though, because in the hypothetical, in what you lay out, the numbers aren't bound to a space, right? You can do that because the numbers are just floating in abstraction. You can subtract 1 and it doesn't impact anything because the numbers don't have to be in a little box or whatever. They don't have to be on a tape per
Sure, but what would lead you to believe that infinity has changed?
Because if you've got an infinite number of rooms and an infinite number of people and a person in each room, this means that there is an equal number of rooms and people. The number is infinite. There is an infinitely large collection of rooms and an infinitely large collection of people. But there's a ratio of 1-to-1 between the collections because there's one person in every room.
You cannot make a ratio, though. There is no ratio. There is no ratio. There never was a ratio.
The rooms
are rooms with people in them. That's how they are defined. I could say...
Sure, but you can just break that down into rooms and people, though.
I mean, sure, but like it doesn't... You see how that doesn't... Like I could just say that the rooms...
Well, because I haven't gotten to the second part of my problem yet.
Okay, I have a feeling I know how you're thinking.
I'm sure you know where I'm going to go.
Hit me anyway, I don't know.
It's very obvious. You definitely know where I'm going with this. But so you've got an infinite number of rooms with people in them.
Yeah.
One person per room.
Yes. Well, sure. The rooms just have people in them. There's not like... But a rule saying that one, because you're thinking of 2 lists. I'm thinking
each room has a person in it, though, not multiple people.
Sure, because those rooms are defined as having one person in them,
right?
Which is just speech.
Well, I mean, it's also the physical space that we're setting up in our conception.
Sure, but like the whole point of the hotel is like, well, yeah, there's also a lamp in each hotel room. There's also a rug.
Right, but we're not adding or moving lamps. If you want to do lamps instead, we can. A moving truck with lamps can show up.
I mean, I'm aware, but I'm saying there are qualities of the room that are inherent to that room. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like, you could say that room has to have a person in it.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true because of the text of the thing, implying that...
Because then you could just say that this extra person needs to move into room 1, right? And then move into room 2, and room 3, and room 4. And, like, say they exit and enter at the exact same time, that still holds. Each room still has to have one person in it. But you now added an extra person, and it'll just cascade down the line.
So you're suggesting there's never a period in time where the rooms don't have people in them?
I think that's what the example is implying. Again, I think it's more of a... Hilbert's Hotel is like a means to understand something that humans can't actually understand.
I'm fully on board for that kind of thing. I just think it's bad.
Sure, which is why I went to the numbers.
Here's why I think it's bad.
Right.
Because if you have an infinite number of rooms, and there's a person in each room, then I think you necessarily derive a ratio of 1-to-1 between rooms and people, because there's an infinite number of rooms with people in them, which means that there is one person in each room, one person per room. Per means ratio.
And I think that might be a problem with just how Hilbert's Hotel is.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's poorly constructed.
I think it holds, but you have to, there's qualities of like, you're separating the people in the rooms, and I don't think that's a good idea. The rooms
Well, I mean, they are
necessarily
separated
must
as
have
that.
people in them, but I'm saying that
Regardless,
even if
that
that's the
doesn't-
case, right? Say the hotel rooms and the people. Say like if you don't have a person in it, it is no longer a hotel room, and but you still have to have an infinite number of hotel
Sure,
rooms.
that doesn't resolve my issue because right now we have a ratio of 1-to-1 between people and rooms.
Right.
Hey, finally.
Well, no.
No, I know. Right now we have a ratio of 1-to-1 between people and rooms. There is one person per room. So even if the
can't
rooms
put a ratio to it, you just can't put a ratio to it.
even if the rooms have to have people in them, that doesn't really. We can still work with that, and the problem still exists because then, what causes, which is fine. I have no problem with this setup. The problem is that then more people get here,
Mm-hmm.
which means, like, let's say we add 5 people. Our ratio is no longer 1-to-1 because there are more people than
Right.
rooms. There's an infinite number of rooms, and
Because-
there's already an infinite number of occupants
You're trying-
equal to the number of rooms. And so
You-
if you add people, then there are more people than rooms necessarily.
You are trying to quantify infinity. That's the problem.
It doesn't have to be quantified because no matter how many rooms there are, an infinite number, there is exactly as
So,
many people.
For example, if I did, does infinity
There are
over
exactly as many
1
people.
exist to you? Does that mean anything?
Infinity over 1?
Infinity divided by 1.
I mean, it would be infinity. Dividing by 1 doesn't do anything.
Exactly. I don't believe infinity. You can't divide infinity by 1. You just can't. It's not a valid operation. You can't do that because infinity is not a number. That operation only applies to numbers. Infinity is not a number. So if I'm trying to come up with a ratio, which would be like putting infinity over infinity, that just doesn't exist. It doesn't mean anything. You're taking 2 inputs to an operation that aren't valid inputs. Right? Like if I have a function that'll say, I'm going to make a coding example here. Say I take a function that takes a character input, right? Of like a lowercase character input, and it'll return me the next character in the sequence. Right? So like if I give it B, it'll give me C. If I give it C, it'll give me D. If I give it D, it'll give me E, right? It'll just goes down the alphabet. And if I give it Z, it gives me A. If I feed a Boolean value into that function, it doesn't do anything because you can't do that. It'll give you an error. It won't allow you to do that because the input itself isn't a character. The same thing with an operation of ratios. If you're trying to find out what a ratio is, you can't quantify that using something that isn't a number because that ratio relies on a number for it to have a meaning.
Can we? So I mean, maybe this is the problem. Maybe this is what makes it bad, because we can agree that there is necessarily implicit in the wording of the question a ratio. There is an implied ratio in the wording of the question.
I wouldn't agree with that, no.
How?
Because I think that
I think the problem is that they're implying a ratio in an environment that isn't amicable to ratios. Like, I think maybe this is the root of the error, the issue.
I don't think that's the case. I think the hotel rooms, I've said this before, I think the hotel rooms I think under that question, you could argue that the hotel rooms necessarily must have a person in it.
That doesn't change anything.
Does it not?
No.
Because then I would say that you could say a necessary hotel or necessary condition of having a hotel room is that it has a person in it.
Okay.
Now you can't weigh a hotel room and a person because they are dependent on each other to exist.
Sure, but you still have the same number of hotel rooms and people. You'd necessarily have the same number of hotel rooms and people because it must have exactly one person in it to exist.
You can't say you can't quantify people and hotel rooms on their own.
Doesn't matter. They still have to exist in the same proportion because one is stringent on the other.
I don't think that holds.
If a hotel room can only exist if there's a person in it,
Mm-hmm.
and let's even make it more specific. A hotel room can only exist if there is exactly one person in it.
Sure.
Then necessarily there is one person in every hotel room.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there wouldn't be a hotel room.
Yeah.
This means that they are of the same quantity, whatever the quantity is. Because there's one person
I think it's
per
a
hotel
rule,
room.
but I don't think you can apply a quantity to it.
Sure, and
'Cause
I'm
it's
not trying
infinite.
to. A ratio is a rule. For every hotel room there is a person.
I don't think that's a rule of ratios. I think it's an existential rule, possibly, but I don't think you can apply a ratio to it. Ratios necessarily must be finite. Otherwise, there is no meaning to them. You cannot quantify them. You cannot come up with any meaning out of it. You can't do anything with it.
Right, and this is the problem that I have with it, because I think the wording of the question necessarily implies a ratio which sets up... Sorry, I said my words in the wrong order again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the wording of the question implies a ratio, which necessarily, as you're saying, sets up a finite bound on something that is... It necessarily makes you quantify something that's unquantifiable because of the ratio, and then adding more people in, that's what causes the problem, because then you have an uneven ratio.
And you could argue that's a problem with the human conception of infinity, which is what I'm arguing is why I just believe that.
Maybe, I mean, it works with your number thing, though. This is just a bad example. The conjecture is just... Or, this isn't a conjecture.
It's like a thought experiment.
Yeah, the experiment is just bad.
Sure, I think if you're taking the number example that I give, which I think you said was
Yeah,
fine,
that works.
I think that can be equated to Hilbert's Hotel. I think the fact that I'm adding an extra person, that adding an extra person doesn't have to be physically adding an extra person. I'm just applying a quality to something. Does that make sense?
Not at all.
Okay, so like remember how I applied a quality to each number of that number line?
Yes.
I subtracted one
Right.
from each of them, and now I have 0. I've made a 0. I think the adding of that person into the next hotel room and then telling them to move on and on and on is kind of the exact same thing as just adding a quality.
The problem is you see that in the number example there's only one variable, and in the hotel example there are two variables. Because in the number example...
You're bringing up... Yeah, exactly.
In the number example, there's only one thing, and it doesn't exist in bounded space. In the hotel example, there is a thing that exists in a designated space. And they're already implied
right, which is
to be
why
equal.
I was trying to explain that I was trying to get to the existential part of being a hotel and it being necessarily having to have a person in it.
Right, but that doesn't change the fact that they have to be of the same... They have to be of equal quantities. They're unquantifiable, but they're equal. Because there has to, in order for the rooms to exist, there has to be exactly one person in it, and so there's exactly one person per room. And so then if you want to add a person, then you have to generate a room.
You're taking an infinity and splitting it into two and creating a one-to-one function between those two infinities and trying to add something that
I'm not.
part
The
of
problem
that.
is, this is the issue.
I don't think the problem is... I think under the way you're understanding the problem, yes, it is.
I don't think you can interpret it a different way. I think semantically there is an implicit ratio. I think if you say that there's a person in each room, and each person gets their own room.
I'm saying a ratio is without... You cannot place a definition to that at all. And you're saying that it's a problem with the wording of the question.
Yeah.
Which I don't think it's a problem with the wording of the question. I think it's the problem with interpretation of
How do you
the question.
interpret it differently?
I think of infinity
structure that
completely
they laid
differently
out.
than you are.
He doesn't say any... Well, he does say something about infinity, but he says that they're the same number. Not verbatim, but there's one person in each room. Each room is occupied. That means that there is one person in each room.
Sure. Yeah. So you could say there is one person in each room, but then you could create like an abstraction that room and the person are its own object.
Sure, it doesn't
Because you're taking two infinite things, not one. I'm thinking of as one, which is why the number thing is working with your brain and the Hilbert's Hotel thing isn't working with your brain.
But you can't. They're not one thing. They're two things. There are people in rooms.
Okay, then you have a problem with just the question.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The question is bad.
Well, I'm saying that you can interpret the question at a deeper level and understand that it's the exact same problem as the number line.
Except that it's bad. It's not.
Sure, you can argue the merit of the question. The wording of the question is not super conducive to the understanding of.
I think the wording of the question
infinities.
implies an impossibility because it's asking you to put a ratio to something that's infinite, which you can't do.
I think I'm okay in accepting that it can be interpreted that way, but I think the whole point of it is to then come to the conclusion that you're reaching at the number line.
I think if that's the point, then it's bad because it's not adequately getting to its point. Because it necessarily implies something that contradicts itself in the wording of the question.
I still take issue with that, but I feel like we'll be arguing this forever if we
Maybe.
don't. But yeah, I think you can, I could add things to the number line example to make it the exact same problem as the Hilbert's Hotel. I guarantee you that, and I can come back prepared next podcast if you want me to.
We'll see. I don't know how much of this they want to listen to, but you should tell me that off podcast sometime.
Okay.
Probably.
Well, I think we actually have covered quite a few bases.
Yeah, we've been going for 3 hours and 20 minutes, so.
So yeah, thank you for sticking with us through this doozy of a podcast.
I think every time we should end on a stupid thing that we don't agree on. We're 2 for 2.
Last time, yeah, with the Cogito argument. Yes. Which I have a feeling will happen multiple times.
If we mention it, it's going to happen again. I really am having to resist the urge to dive back into it now.
Anyway. You take a question, you take problem with the...
Okay, that's time to stop this. I'm getting loopy.
But yeah, thank you if you've gotten to the end of this. I am...
Impressed.
Very, very impressed with your ability to to listen to us ramble. That's hopefully you got something from it, but yeah, hopefully your brain isn't completely fried.
Yeah, this was very fun for us. Hopefully it was very fun for you, or at least just like adequate background stuff while you're doing something else.
Playing Minecraft.
Based. Yeah. Yep. But if it wasn't, we really don't care because we're doing this for fun.
Yep. No offense, but yeah.
Yeah. With that said, if we could make it more fun for you and still have fun, then tell us how, because it'll be more fun for us, I think.
Yes.
As a
I think it'll help the cause overall.
As a factor of the number of people? As a corollary to the number of people?
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. Thank you.